I have 6 o'clock on April 26, 2023, and I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Hastings Independent School District 200 regular school board meeting. Director Beisel, can you please take attendance?
Director Tate? Here. Director Beisel here. Director Malm? Here. Chair Hadeen?
Here.
Director Dressley? Here. Director Zuzik?
Present.
And Director Davis is absent right now.
All right, thank you. I would ask everybody to please stand if you are able and remove your hats. We'll recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right, thank you. Make note that Director Davis is in attendance. He joined us during the Pledge of Allegiance. This time I would accept a motion and a second to approve the agenda.
So move.
Second.
Motion Director Malm, second Director Zuzik. Is there any discussion? Director Tate?
I move to amend the agenda to add a brief discussion regarding sexually explicit materials. Following at the February 8th meeting, I provided information that the board had not had a chance to review at the time of the meeting, and the discussion was ended with an assumption that the policy committee may take it up, but that's not what is being communicated to constituents, and I would just like to close the loop, I guess.
Okay, so what I want to be clear on is the motion. We're not discussing the purpose of the motion at this point. We're discussing the motion. The motion is to amend, the motion on the table is to approve the agenda with a second motion to add an item. So we're going to unpack that backwards. Is there a second to the second motion?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? So we'll unpack that with the amendment first and then move back. Is there any discussion to the motion? Director Tate.
Just to finish my comment, as I said, the discussion had ended rather abruptly, and I don't think that there was a clear direction or no direction given. So I just want to close the loop on that topic for clarity's sake.
Is there any further discussion on the motion to add this item? That's not how it works.
I'll try to make this very quickly because I don't know if it'd be appropriate to discuss it at this time as with moving it to amend the agenda, but I left that with a clear direction that it wasn't going to policy, that it would go to the next review cycle for review, or if it's brought up with majority
okay, I'm going to interrupt, and I saw you hesitate for this purpose. We are not discussing the item. We are discussing the motion to add the item. Is there any further discussion to that topic? All right, hearing none, call a vote. All those in favor of adding the topic signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. All right. Topic will be added for discussion, not for action. Closing that item, the motion on the table is to approve the agenda. And we have a second. Do we have any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Our next item is a motion to approve the minutes from the March 22nd, 2023 regular board meeting, the March 27th, 2023 special board meeting, the March 29th, 2023 special board meeting, and the April 12th, 2023 special board meeting. Minutes are attached. Can I hear a motion and a second for approval.
Motion. Zuzek.
Second.
Second was by Beisel. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. I want to take a minute and recognize all of our visitors, both real and online, either those watching us in current time or those watching later. We appreciate your attention to the work of the school board. Reset. All right, Superintendent McDowell, you have some announcements and recognitions.
I do. We have a couple good news items tonight. We're going to actually start. We're going to reverse of what's on the agenda there. We're going to do employees of the semester first. And as a reminder, each semester, our staff has the opportunity to nominate their colleagues for employee of the semester. A committee representing each group of staff throughout the district then makes the difficult decision of selecting 6 of their colleagues as the employees of the semester. Tonight, we want to acknowledge the 2022-2023 semester 2 employees of the semester. These 6 individuals will now be added to the first semester selections for the Employee of the Year voting, which will take place in the coming week. So I know we have a couple of them here tonight, but I'll read the names, and those that are here, please come up to the front table. Bill Reuter, who is a high school teacher. Aaron Stewart, middle school nurse. Jenny Berg, District Office Payroll and Benefits Supervisor. Chris Strub, Kennedy speech teacher. Scott Adaman, Pinecrest Student Success Coach, and John Mateg, our district-wide delivery and driver and grounds person. So, school board, I present to you 3 of our 6 employees of the semester for semester 2.
Congratulations. I think I say this every time, but it's so meaningful every time. This is a recognition that comes from your peers, by your peers, and it's competitive because we have a lot of really outstanding staff that are doing their job, and they're going above and beyond, keeping students at the heart of everything that they do. And know that your work is seen. It's seen by your peers, and it's seen by the board, it's seen by the students, and it's seen by the community. Thank you so very much.
Our second good news tonight, I'll steal a little bit of Mr. Hansen's thunder. I'm sure he's going to introduce a little bit, but quite possibly will go down as one of the most historic state tournament events in Minnesota history. So with that, I'm going to bring Trent Hansen up and some coaches and some kiddos of our Hastings High School wrestling team. I won't break the news. It's probably still a secret, isn't it? Yeah, come on up, guys. Gals.
Step to the front and turn that mic on. Like tap.
All right. I'll introduce these guys here real quick. So we brought our captains and our state place winners here today. So I'll start with the little guy here first. We got Trey Beisel as our smallest one here. So he took first place at the state tournament. Blake Beisel also took first place at the state tournament. Josh Rout, he took 6th place at the state tournament. Aiden Erickson took 5th place at the state tournament. Not here tonight is Rico Cooper. He took 6th at the state tournament. Blake Clemens, our heavyweight, took 4th. And the last one here is our captain, Ian Peppel, who's 1 match away from placing at the state tournament. Aiden, Blake, Ian, and Rico, Josh are all our captains on the team as well. So, yeah, so I brought these guys with. If you guys just be patient with me for a second, I got some more things to say about our team because we had a pretty good year. So we had 45 boys on the team and 18 girls this year, so pretty cool for the girls program. A couple years ago, we had 1 girl on the team. Last year, we had 6, and this year we had 18, so we tripled in size and hoping to get over 30 girls next year too, so pretty cool. For the boys, we ended the year 37-5 was our final record. We took third at the Minnesota Christmas Tournament, second at the Clash, first at the Bi-State. Our girls, we also had a bunch of girls that wrestled at the Clash Tournament, the Bi-State, and a Pine Island all-girls tournament. Our girls competed at the section tournament, pretty cool. We hosted the girls section tournament for the second year this year, and in 2 years, we filled all 12 weights for the girls. We had every girl, all 12 girls, place in the top 5 at the section tournament. We had 4 state qualifiers. We had 2 last year, so we doubled that from last year. We had at the state tournament, Skylar Little Soldier was a state champion as well, so she became a 2-time state champion, which is pretty neat in our history. To begin too, I forgot this one. We had 32 boys that earned their varsity letter, and we had 15 girls that earned their varsity letter as well. Boys section tournament, 12 out of the 14, there's 14 weights, and we had 12 out of the 14 boys qualified for the state tournament. We had 9 section champs. And then once again, in the boys individual state tournament, we had 6 place winners, and I read through those as well. Team tournament, which is kind of why we're here as well. We started off, we wrestled Wilmer, and that was a really tough duel. They ended up taking 5th, and it was a barn burner. Waconia, who beat us earlier in the year. We beat them in the semifinals, and then the one that everyone thinks about and talks about is the St. Michael one in the finals. They beat us twice this year, which is another kind of common theme with our team from this year. St. Michael beat us twice, Waconia beat us, and we really use failure to kind of grow throughout the year. 4 matches in that duel, we lost to them earlier, and we flipped those around and beat them. And then we pinned the final 3 opponents to win by 1. And once again, just a true team effort. And I think another coach from a different team summed it up pretty perfectly. He said, you guys wrestle for each other, and we just wrestle with each other. So these kids are truly brothers, and our girls on our team are sisters. It's truly a family effort here. Just a couple other things here. Just want to give a shout out to our coaching staff while I got the microphone here. Legendary coach Paul Veit, Josh McClay, Pete Kranz, Kevin McBride, Andy Trembath, Alex Diaz, Alicia Brown, and Luke Veit. They're all at the high school. Cal Kreiser, Mitch Sheeman, and Ryan Mulvihill are at the middle school, and we got a ton of other youth coaches. Last couple of things here. Oh, one thing I really want to give a shout out to is our season. I talked about a few losses, and one of the things that really turned our season around was our senior right here, Ian Pepple, who's a FCA huddle leader. He started leading the prayers before duels, and I truly think that's when our season started changing around. Last thing I would like to talk about is this weekend, Bob Rudy, who's a alumni, 1965 state champ for us, our second state champ in school history. He's being inducted into the Minnesota Wrestling Coaches Association Hall of Fame, so pretty cool deal for our wrestling program. So that's all I got for you guys. If you guys have any questions, these guys are big talkers here, so they'll answer any questions you guys got. So I'll leave this on for a little bit, and they can come up. Any questions for me too, and I'll answer it.
I just want to say well done. Like, that was an amazing end of your season, and I mean, obviously a tremendous end to a tremendous season. Great job.
Which of you are seniors? And if you are, I know at least a couple of you are, what are you doing next year? Or what are you thinking? Josh, you can see.
I'm going to college at Stevens Point, Wisconsin.
All right. Will you wrestle?
No.
I'm going to UW Eau Claire next year, and I'm committed to wrestle there as well.
I'm trying to get in the Army. I have someone that's kind of helping me with that because I have some medical problems, but that's hopefully the plan.
What do you want to do in the Army?
I want to go for Rangers. It's been my goal for a few years, but I just have like a heart problem I was born with, so I'm just trying to kind of fight through that. So yeah.
No, I wish you all the luck. That's awesome.
Thank you.
First of all, it's a credit to you to be at the level you are in wrestling with what else you've got going on. So that's huge. Don't ever take that for granted. That's something to take a lot of pride in. So well done there. And for all of you, I'm just curious, just for each of you, what grade did you start this in? And how many hours you guys put in a week on the work you're doing?
Well, I'll start. I started when I was about 2 or 3 years old. My dad was the youth coach, so I kind of just went along and tagged along, but I didn't really get serious about it until I was like probably 6 or 7 years old. And then right now, me and my brother, we do wrestle about 5 days a week. So probably around 8 to 10 hours every single week. But during the season, it was 7 days a week and probably a little over like 12, 13 hours.
I'm assuming that's organized practice and not at home where you're wrestling with each other.
Yeah, mainly just the organized practice, and then we do our own workouts on our own.
So we'll kick the kids out, so Tim has to sit.
We got to have Mr. Hannenberg stay.
Thanks.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to present and recognize Tim in particular. As you know, he's a district educator. He's our head wrestling coach at the high school. And he was recently presented with 2 significant coaching awards. First, he was named the Section 3-3A Head Coach of the Year. And he was also named the Minnesota State High School Wrestling Coaches Association State Coach of the Year. It's a repeat section award for Tim, but it's a first time and a very distinguished state level coach of the award. That's determined by a vote of the 63 other coaches in Class 3A. So it's a big deal. For some context, I just want to share that our sport programs at the high school are goal-oriented, but they're purpose-driven. So that means that our goals are largely outcome-based, and you just heard a bucket full of them from wrestling that was just outstanding. A 37-5 overall record, the first ever girls team dual victory in school history, 3 individual state champs, a dominant section team victory, and then just a thrilling state championship, all of which put a really bright spotlight appropriately on our kids, our program, our community, and certainly on Tim. But the purpose piece is we're all about developing character and community, leveraging sports at that lab for learning lifelong lessons, right? That in this case, these kids can take on the mat and off. They can use it now and when they graduate. It's activating growth in things like integrity and respect, sportsmanship, work ethic. Tim is very passionate about and clearly committed to that purpose. So I'm confident that his recognition at both of these levels is not only for what our wrestling team and kids accomplished, but how they did it. So when you look at the year, they were gritty, they were collaborative, they were first class in everything they did all the way throughout the year, but certainly at the section and state level. And that's a direct reflection of not only his approach, but his leadership. And I commend him for it. It just brings me great joy to be able to celebrate him in this format. So thank you for helping me congratulate Tim Hannenberg. Well done, man. And you can grill him with all the questions you have here if you want.
Well, I just want to know that I want you to know that the work you do within the district, both as an educator and a coach, and then supporting students outside of those roles, is recognized and acknowledged, and we hold it very, very dear. And it's very, very valuable to the students and to their families. And I just want to know that that's really appreciated and that you're recognized for that. It's great. Everybody loves it when you get to be a winner and you get to walk home with the big trophy, and that's super cool. And it's amazing that the kids get that experience. But I think the experience that students have just interacting with you as a representative of an educator is invaluable. Thank you. All right, next on the agenda is a listening session summary.
There were no attendants at the listening session today, so there is nothing to report.
Okay, thank you for that update. Next, we'll move to reports and discussions. The first item is our superintendent's report.
All All right, I will be brief because we had so much good news to share and keep us moving along. But I do want to make sure that we keep it on the radar that we're continuing our referendum preparation work for the expiring levy that's up and coming in November. The residential survey should be completed this week. That's been out with the results being shared with the board on May 10th. Last week, we held an information session here in this space and plan to hold a second meeting once we have the survey results back and we have more information regarding the decisions from the Minnesota legislature and governor from this session. And we have opened up a web page now that can be found off of the About Us section that will continue to be providing updates as we move along through the process so that we have one place to house all the information related to this, as well as we have a live form there that anyone can fill out with a question, and that will help us develop a frequently asked questions page to hopefully continue to provide as much factual information and answer questions from the community and house them in one spot. That is my update for tonight.
Alrighty, that's terrific. It's great to see the website being used for such timely and accurate and comprehensive information. I think that's going to be really valuable as we go through the summer on this work. Our next item for discussion and update is the Building Construction Fund Project update. Ms. Subert? Or Cam Peterson? Mr. Peterson, I'm not sure who's giving the summary. Okay, apparently Ms. Subert. Thank you.
So just a reminder, the Building Construction Fund is money that the district received from the voter-approved bonds. And again, this money can only be used for school renovations and improvements. So just a few updates since last month. The overall contingency or kind of available funds is now at 1.4 million. And we got there by kind of going through a few of the projects that are very close to closeout and reallocating some of those funds out of those projects. So the district office renovations project, the high school privacy improvements, the middle school track, the middle school storage shed building, the district-wide fire alarm and alert system, and the high school fire alarm and alert system. All of those budgets were kind of looked at, and the excess funds were moved, and that totaled $657,000. The only other update is that the boardroom renovation phase 2 has been added as a project after the board approved that, and the budget on that is $6,641. And I can take any questions if there are any.
Not seeing any questions, we'll move to our next report and discussion topic from our innovation teams. I'm looking to the back of the room. I presume that's why these people are here, not because they want to just watch the board meeting.
They are. While they're coming up, I'll give a little introduction. We've got our members of our secondary administration team. This relates to a couple different things going on. Over the past year or so, we have been working on program reviews at the secondary, and those have morphed into what we're calling innovation teams. This has implications potentially for what we do moving in the short term and the long term with regard to programming and finances as well. And at the request of the board, a couple meetings ago, we gave the first round of updates, and the board had requested that the group, when it was able to put some more finality and some details with regard to the frameworks as well as potential costings to come back and present. So tonight, the team is here to provide the second round of innovation team information and give you that information so you can have that as part of your toolbox and in terms of making decisions as we move forward. So with that, I will introduce our secondary team.
Yeah, he meant you were going to introduce yourselves.
Oh, okay.
That's superintendent speak for please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I need a translation. I'm Steve Kovach. I'm the principal at the middle school.
My name's Joe Haas, assistant principal at the middle school.
Hi, I'm Scott Dorn, principal at the high school.
I am Chris Moore, assistant principal at the high school.
And we do have Mindy Tavernier in the back, assistant principal, high school.
Get another chair.
Yeah. She said no.
So I think we need the.
So we have the screens up. I will have to ask Director Zuzik and Director Dressley maybe to look backwards or look at their own screen for the time being while the third one's being reset and the one to the audience, I believe, is functioning. So
I got it.
we can get started.
All right.
See if it works.
All right. Well, we wanted to start off with, I think we shared this with you during the board work session in March, but just going off of the students, parents, and staff priorities, these are what all of us came up with through our groups and through the work with the community. That student and mental health, relationships and connectedness, real world exploration and experience, and then student choice and electives. So those were priorities kind of across 512.
What was nice is we had two separate groups, one at the high school, one at the middle school, and the alignment separate. When we finally came back together and shared results, how much we were aligned was really kind of unique.
And it actually helped. We would sit in on each other's meetings, so just kind of fly on the wall. So it helped to kind of see what they were working on and what we were working on. So I think these are also things that you've seen, but the priorities for us at the middle school, creating those pods and teams in all grades. And you'll see kind of throughout our presentation for the middle school anyway that we talk about 6 through 8 because we have those pods already in 5th grade. So working to do that students first focus, making sure that we shrink our schools a little bit, having those teams at each grade level I think is really important. And then that equitable scheduling of exploratories and just looking at that structure of the day to make sure that we create space for those opportunities, and then decreasing that opportunity cost. So when kids have certain things, not having to give up those exploratories. And then overall just increasing opportunities for kids, those exploratories.
Yeah, in high school, as you can see, really those three buckets are wellness and connectedness, including our common planning time. So teachers have a time to come together to discuss not only students, but curriculum and how we can change and kind of adapt and get better at what we do. The experiential learning is really key, providing time for teachers to make that connection with our community. Some of the work group that Bob started with some of our local folks, really the businesses, we've got the opportunity to reach out, not only get things from the businesses, but provide service to the business and make that real back and forth connection. And then again, structure the school day. How can we do all of those things within the time we have kids in class, in the building, to provide intervention time, and again, those connections. So those are our kind of top priorities, very similar to the middle school.
So you had shared with us that any option needs to fulfill the state mandated requirements, must realize the financial impact, and then also looking for offset costs that can happen in order to adopt our desirable solution, or options. So that's kind of our starting point when we went back from the work session. So I think we already talked a little bit about our desirable priorities, but the team model, the exploratory exposure, and then looking at the structure of the day to make sure that we can do those first two. So that's a little bit of a review slide. So we'll just walk through the options, and we've attached some dollar amounts on here. So option A is basically keeping our schedule as it is, not adding exploratory classes, but focusing on creating those pods or teams and the common planning time that the high school talked about, making sure that teachers have that collaboration time. This would, we would need to do some redistribution of FTEs, and then that cost also would be any additions for different programming as we go along. So that 0 is we could really look close all the way up to maybe add a few or a 0.5 FTE. So that's why that range is like that. Want to be?
Yeah. So again, as we're looking, you asked us to provide options, and the reason we're providing different options is, can we get all three of those desirable impacts to our day or not? And so we kind of laid out an option A that gets to some, an option B that gets to some, and then an option C that gets to all. So that's how they're laid out. So option B is staying with the 6-period day that we're currently on. That's our student story, is we have a 6-period day, kids have 6 classes throughout the day. But the option B adds an exploratory class in each grade level. So throughout their middle school experience, they get 3 more exploratories than they currently have. So we'd add that to their story, right? And that was the variety and the additional choice or offerings that came through in the survey. Now, to do this, we would need some extra FTE because we're adding some class. And so we need bodies in front of the students to instruct the class, but also looking for that common planning time and pod. So it's almost an option A plus. That's our option B. So that's where that dollar amount. And when we say FTE redistributed, we look at how is our current FTE used and how can we use it differently. For example, we don't have common planning time now. In order to get that, our kids have to go to a common place so teachers can plan together around kids and around content. And so we might have to redistribute how we use our FTE in order to get that to happen. So when you see that FTE redistribution, that's what it's talking about. Okay? So option B is really option A plus, where we get that desirability of an added exploratory, which came loud and clear with kid surveys, with adult surveys. Hey, we're a middle school. We're supposed to expose kids to different things before they get up and start choosing electives at the high school. And so that's where we came up with the option B.
Can you just touch on that trimester wheel piece part of it?
Yeah. Sure, yeah. So right now, our student story, and I say that because it's their daily lives, our exploratories run every other day, and each student has 2 exploratories in a grade level, right? And so it's an every other day class. The trimester wheel would add an exploratory, but for example, you would have, right now in 7th grade art, you would have that every day for a trimester instead of an every other day class. And then you would have, we also have computer science as our other exploratory. You'd have that every day for a trimester. Then we'd add that exploratory in the wheel. So you're almost going around the wheel, right? And each trimester you do something new. The caveat there is it wouldn't work with the way we currently run opportunity cost, and so we'd have to program other things differently in order to make this happen, which we can, while still keeping in mind meeting those state mandated minimum requirements that was requested by the board. Yeah, so that's what that trimester wheel is.
And then option C is, oh, sorry.
We just have a question from Director Tate.
So if I could just, so I had a 5th grader, but my understanding of pods is the physical location of the kids are kind of broken up. But obviously we're not going to change the building to accommodate that. So what does that pod structure really look like for the other grades?
And we've toyed around with it a little bit, just thinking about where to locate. I mean, our one sort of limitation is that all the science rooms are in the middle of the building upstairs. So we would figure out hallways. 6th grade's kind of organized that way. 6th grade's in 2 hallways. So they're kind of organized as a pod right now. So it would be a challenge, but.
The real thing about the pod structure, the team structure, it's interchangeable. When you hear pod, when you hear team, when you hear house, middle school language, those are all interchangeable. And it's putting a cohort of students with a team of teachers. And so those teachers really know those students well. So instead of having all the content by one another, where all the math teachers are together, you would have a social studies teacher, language arts teacher, science teacher, which one did I miss? Language, arts, social studies, math, and science. The 4 cores would be together, and kids would travel less around the building because hopefully we could get them closer together. Now, we're in our old high school that was content driven, right? And so we have some limitations, but we've toyed around and already looked at the possibility of moving staff to different locations to really have that honed in model. And that's where the lockers would be. Right now, they're alphabetical by grade. And so really just making their world a little bit smaller to focus on them. That's that pod. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And then I have one other question. If you're adding an exploratory class, and you mentioned art and, I can't think of it now.
Computer science.
Computer science, thank you.
Right, yeah.
So are there additional, or I guess, what are you thinking for additional options?
So that would be, that's kind of a next step thing, like having the conversation of what the actual exploratories are. Is it based on data of something that our kids need? Is it conversations vertical with the high school? Do we need to, is there something that we should be exposing kids to that would help them as they progress up? So that would be like a total next step, because we have those questions. Joe and I have had those questions listed for a long time, like what's the right exploratory to offer kids? Is it language, world language? I mean, so there's all kinds of conversation that needs to happen once we get to that point.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then our option C is that 7-period day, adding 2 exploratory classes to each grade level in 6, 7, 8, and then also keeping that creation of teams and pods and that common planning time. So this one, obviously, the price tag is a little higher because we're talking more FTE. For adding those 2 in each grade level, it's about, I don't know, from 6.5 to 8.5 FTE for this one. So.
And the other thing is that opportunity cost that we talked about with this 7-period day, when you have, and they'd run on an every other day schedule like we do now.
We have some examples.
Be a trimester reel. Yeah, we have some examples.
So we can kind of show you what. So this is our current one. So you can just see what kids have in terms of options. So they have the PE music. If kids take 2 musics, they really don't have, or if kids don't take music, sorry, their only option really is to take an extra FIAD class, or if they're in a upper grade, to do an office worker to help us in the office. So just wanted to make sure you should. I mean, I think most people are pretty familiar with our current schedule. And just talking about, it is an efficient schedule. Students have limited classes to keep track of. But they also have those minimal exploratory options, and there's just a lot of opportunity cost. Kids miss out on exploratories if they have something else, if they have 2 musics or intervention or special ed. And then we only have the pod and the teams in 5th grade. So. And this is the wheel.
Yeah, this is the wheel, so this is be more like our FIAD music still would stay every other day as it currently is, but we'd add that exploratory 1, exploratory 2, and then exploratory 3. Again, the point is to expose students to something else. What? We don't know yet. That's added work or continued work that we would do. And I know Mr. Kovac gave you an explanation of what those discussions would look like and what the focus would be.
So that one more class, and still having the program differently if we allow the 2 music choices as an option. And then the 7-period, you can see the extra exploratories, very similar to the previous schedules, but the extra period, which adds quite a few more options for kids.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize my mic was on. I hope that didn't screw up any audio anywhere. So I know the majority of this discussion is around 6-8, around at least the pods piece, because that doesn't currently exist, 6-8. But just for clarity, when you propose a different period day or a trimester wheel or something, that's a 5-8 shift. Or is that not true? 5th grade would, if you move to
yes,
is it possible? Is it probable? I don't know however you could characterize what is maybe likely to happen.
I would say yes, and we always try and stay on as similar schedules as possible, but we do know that we want to shrink the 5th graders, the world down as much as possible. So they're even a little different now than our 6 through 8 with the way that it's set up. And with licensure things that of who can teach what is why it's set up that way. And we want to still continue to do that. I think because I think it's beneficial at that level, at the 5th grade level. It still is an elementary mindset in a middle school building, and so we want to include them in middle school types of things, but still their brain development is still elementary level. And so that's why I wouldn't foresee too many changes in 5th grade. They wouldn't change classes as much as 6th, 7th, and 8th grade does. And so.
All right. I'll get 1 second. I'm not 100% sure I feel answered, but I accept that because I know we're really early in the process. So just a recognition that there may be some differentiation down to 5th grade, but the bells only ring one time and they ring on a certain schedule. So there's going to be some possible impacts in a modified schedule.
Yes,
and I'm comfortable with that.
And currently our 5th grade goes on breaks at different times, and so even though we have a bell system,
they don't follow early.
They follow what's good for the 5th graders at that time, so we're not intermingling as much. Our 5th graders still go out to Phi-Ed, they still go out to, because that's where our spaces are. They still go out to music, and those things wouldn't change. Yeah.
An observation that'll lead to a question, if you will. You comment that the programming under a 7-period day allows for kids taking 2 musics to still get to 3 exploratory courses. So that's a comment. The observation is it also avails an opportunity for kids that are struggling to get more academic support during the day, whether that's math lab or special ed pull-out classes or interventions. True?
Yes.
Yeah, we call that win time, but just to give one example for clarity, the win time, what I need, whether that's another music, whether that's math.
Yeah.
And sometimes students on IEPs have to have an opportunity cost, and then it affords those teen choices an extra exploratory as well. Yep.
Right, and there are kids that are missing academic classes to get win time sometimes if they need more support. So there's a lot of, as you add more boxes, it really increases the flexibility and does everything related to balancing class sizes too. Thank you.
Thanks. So we have a couple other things that we have added in here, things that we have had in place over the last couple of years through ESSER funds, that when those ESSER funds go away, that we would hope to continue. So we're adding this also in there, that student support, whether it's MTSS, SEL, restorative practices, which we're looking more into in terms of discipline, and those alternatives to suspension. And then our math intervention, in looking back, we've requested extra FTE the last 2 or 3 years for that extra math intervention for kids. So we're figuring this in also, so you'll see when we get, after the high school gets done presenting theirs, we all kind of have our summary slides. So you have those first dollar amounts that we talked about in A, B, and C. And then we also have a next slide that has those A, B, and C's with this extra ask on here also.
Director Tate.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, do we have data that shows that the SEL, the restorative practices, the stuff is highly effective and therefore needs to have resources and additional dollars allocated to it?
And the restorative is, we just brought a group this year to get trained. So I think we're still kind of dipping our toe into it. But what we're finding is if we have kids that have behavior difficulties, I'd say 8 times out of 10, it doesn't really do any good to suspend them, because they're going home and they may be going home and they're not supervised or their parents are working. And so it would be in our best interest to do all we can to keep them in our building. But we don't necessarily have the support to do that right now, because it takes people. We can have them in the office, but we're all doing our jobs and trying to manage what they're doing. So I think that piece, we still have a lot of work to do in learning and figuring out how that works. But I think it's an important thing for us to look into, just because, you look at some of the legislature for the elementary, like the no suspensions for K-3 or whatever's in the works now. That's not necessarily our case, but we just see it having those options for kids instead of getting them out of the building.
Yeah, it helps to negate that lack of being in the building and really missing out on that instructional time, and having that be kind of a teachable moment, restoring those relationships, whether it's with staff to student or student to student. Very research-based. I did my master's thesis on restorative, and we're looking into it very, very significantly on how we can get that brought in, even just as a concept, as kind of how to have a conversation with a kid about an incident that happened. So and you'll see it kind of on our slide as well, on how important that is.
I'd like to recognize Superintendent McDowell. I think he has some insights with regard to MTSS and beyond.
Yeah, I think back to the root of the question, is there research on this? There's a significant body of research on multi-tiered systems of support, behavioral, SEL, the whole piece. Anecdotally, or I shouldn't say anecdotally, closely related geographically to us. There are, particularly at the high school, there are high schools who have implemented BAR, building assets, reducing risks, as a primary example, that have seen significant reductions in student behavior, increases in student academic success, reductions in failure rates, increases in graduation rates, less fighting in the building. You pick a topic, and the ability for a school, regardless of whether it's a middle school, elementary school, high school, to put in a systemic way of those areas combined. So a framework around both academic and behavioral multi-tiered systems of support, running that triangle of intervention for 85, 15, 5% of your kids, and doing it with fidelity, that's when you see the change. And that's where all the schools that have done it are seeing the data and utilize. That's why they're utilizing it. Quite frankly, it's why the legislature in all the bodies of the legislature are pushing so hard for it, is because it's something not only that the administration of different school districts get behind, but the teachers union gets behind it. It is something that works. It's a challenge to pull off, but it is. I don't.
And we've done a significant amount of work in our building this year, like coming up with and putting a process in place for MTSS, like broad, building wide, and I know the high school is also, and having that person to guide it along helps hugely. I mean, I don't know, you'll eventually probably hear from the elementaries. They have just some phenomenal things going on with MTSS that they've come and helped us kind of walk and get things planned. So to get to a certain point and then all of a sudden have this drop off in a year or two would be detrimental, I think, to our kids and to our staff. So.
And as you mentioned, the alignment, elementary to middle to high school is what we're really going for with that kind of a system, those types of positions.
All right.
Well, that's it?
That's it. Drop them.
So as you can see, again, we shared this a little bit earlier, high school priorities. Kind of move on from that. Typically, or right now, we're on a 7-period day. We're at about 71% efficiency with teachers teaching 5 out of 7. And as you can kind of take a look, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but there are limited number of elective options the lower you are in your grade level, 9th and 10th grade. Even the 6 options in the 10th grade, really they have the options, but the number of classes to take really isn't there yet. Not until you get into that junior and senior year when you built those developed skills to take those elective classes. Anything else about that?
Yeah, just to let you know where we came up with all these courses, we went to the Minnesota State high school requirements for credits and courses. So that's where you're going to see consistently in each of the schedules is meeting the state standards that way. So that just so you know where it becomes a required versus elective.
So within that 7-period day, some benefits. We have been doing a great job with our advisory. That's 2 years old now. We have a little bit of experiential learning going on depending on the class you're in. Some of our tech classes, a little more hands-on. They've been doing a little bit of outreach. Our technology students went to Delta today and hung out. And you went with them.
Super cool experience.
Super cool. So those are the kind of things that we're looking to do. With the structure of the school day, again, we're able to get creative with our schedule and flex a little bit with our Raider Connect days, where we kind of throw out the old 7-period day schedule and do something different. We're able to do that. It's a little bit of an interruption with where normal flow, but we're able to do it. Kids are managing up to 7 classes at a time, and the feedback we're getting is it's a lot, the level of homework and kind of the traditional way we teach and assign homework. It's a lot. It's for kids. Those classes are limited to 46 minutes, so getting out of the building or connecting and doing projects, you think about an auto class where you take out your small engine and you're working on it. By the time you get there and you get it set up, you've got 9 minutes to work on it, and then you're tearing it down and cleaning up again. So it's one of those limitations within the 7-period day. And again, we talked about the electives.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay.
So the 6-period day, what you're seeing here is the 6-period day on a trimester system. So each trimester would be roughly 60 days long. As you're looking at this, in order to get extra electives, so the difference really between middle school 6-period day trimester proposal and this one is we're looking at year-long courses going 2 of the 3 tries. So English 9 would be try 1 and try 2. Or it could be, as you see up there, try 1 and try 3. It just gets split out. But when you split that and open it up a little bit more, you allow for a little bit more elective opportunities early on in 9th and 10th grade, and then open it up a little more later on. Any course that we're currently running right now for a semester long would just be 1 trimester. So that's how this schedule would open up. The pros and cons to this course, or the benefits and limitations, still allows for us to run an advisory schedule. Each of these schedules, if you look closely at the times, has a 15-minute advisory period, just not shown on there for keeping the size. So it's manageable that way to see. So we can still do that. It allows for slightly longer classes. We get about 10 additional minutes per class. But over the course of the year, the limitation with that is you're now 2 of 3 tries instead of a full year-long class, or cutting it down from a semester to a trimester, so losing about 30 days from a semester to a trimester. The structure of the school day, it does allow us to increase elective options for the 9th and 10th grade and all levels, but specifically in the younger grade levels to get them into more of those experiential learning opportunities. And it continues to allow for us to adjust the schedule to still have Raider Connect days so that we can intervene with students and help them get caught up. Limitations, it's 6 classes to concentrate and manage yet, and under this schedule we wouldn't be able to offer study halls. Right now if a student wants a study hall, they still take 6 classes, but this one would be not as manageable for study halls that way, so students would take a full schedule, full load of courses that way. Again, it allows some time, but it may not be enough to get out into the community, do some shadowing, and have longer experiential learnings, but it does allow for us to do a little bit more that way. And then structure of the day, again, specialized courses. If we wanted those to run year-long, because music wants to be all year, AP courses want to be all year, our college and the schools courses, or students that need more interventions and we want to put them into more math help, and so run that course year-long. Now we're starting to whittle away at the elective options that they had, and we'd be running more toward actually reducing options for those students.
And just before we look at our last schedule, just a reminder that we had a bonus innovation team meeting where we came back after the board work session and had our team get together and say, all right, here's what the board's looking for. If we're looking at, again, the structure of the school day, they were able to narrow down to these 3 options of what they think we would be able to meet those top 3 priorities and hit them hard based on these 3 schedules. And some work better than others, as you're learning here. And then we go to the 4x4. Go ahead.
I'm gonna, Director Malm has a question.
So going back, I think it's just 2 slides. So looking at this particular model, you mentioned that going from a 7 to a 6 hour period, we're gaining 10 minutes per class roughly throughout the day. We're looking at trimesters, is that correct? Yep. But would lose essentially 30 days. I'm just wondering too, if you have any insight, and it's mainly for my own curiosity, if the longer, the 10 minutes extra is more beneficial for the teacher, for the student connection, or if having those additional days too, where, you essentially sit down for 46 minutes and then you go through the stuff and then all of a sudden the bell rings and it's time to go on. So I don't know if you have any insight on that. and if there's a preference.
Yeah, so we do have some insight that it does allow for more of those experiential learnings. You're with teachers for a longer period of time, so it does allow for more relationship building. And depending on how everything goes here tonight and the guidance that we get from you, this is a schedule that we want to go look at. There's neighboring school districts that run this that we can dive deeper into some more of those questions and look at, does one schedule give us more flexibility, more options, better opportunities to meet the buckets that we've set.
Just one, I guess, concern that I've got. I see that the core subjects are being reduced from 3 trimesters to 2 a lot of the time. Just kind of wondering, I mean, I'm assuming we're still meeting state statute with doing this. But I guess just a concern, I think, I'm just looking at our MCA scores and literacy issues. I think we can admit that we'd like them to be higher. So I guess I'm just calling that out as concern to go down on the cores.
And you think about that additional elective opportunities similar to the middle school. If we have students identified that need more intervention in some of the math labs and those kinds of things, again, that comes with the cost of the staffing, and they aren't able then to take some of the exploratory electives as well. Yeah. So as we look at the last of the 3 options presented by our innovation team, it's a 4x4 block. So it's basically a semester's worth of coursework in 9 weeks worth of time. We go from our typical right now, we're able to offer 14 classes per year. This bumps us up to 16 classes per year. We're definitely obviously able to do the advisory as well. Fewer classes, almost half the number of classes at any given time that our students are currently concentrating on. That frees up some time at home. An 86 or 84-minute class, typically the structure that I've taught in the past is you've got some instruction, you've got some work time, you're able to get in front of kids, find out where they're at, assess them more deeply each day versus waiting till the next quiz or the next test. And so you're able to use some more class time for that work instead of pushing that off till after school hours and, you know, sports and work and those, you know, family commitments. Again, your staff members are working with fewer students per term, so they're able to better relate to those kids, get to know them better. Instead of 160 some kids, you're working with that smaller group, maybe 90 per semester on average. And then again, within the schedule, fairly easily able to provide common planning time for teachers. Like we've talked about, the experiential learning goes way up, the opportunities go way up as we have almost twice the amount of minutes per class, whether it's having folks come in and do panel work or having kids go out and truly do internships and work with businesses and you know, local community members. Again, we're increasing electives as we go up from 14 to 16 options. Again, those intervention times, I come from a system where it was just a dedicated time every couple of weeks where you stop time. And out of your 86-minute class, every single class stops 10 minutes early, and now you're working with kids one-on-one, doing that remedial and catch-up and intervention work. And then fewer transitions during the day. A lot of times in schools, all levels, when we have transitions through the hallway and kids are passing kids and you've got 1,400 kids transitioning, things happen. And to reduce the number of transitions drastically reduces the number of incidents that happen and those opportunities for kids to make poor choices. So limitations, we do need some PD as it relates to teaching on a block. It's not, you just smash 2 classes together and go about your business. It really is transforming teaching, and that takes time and some energy and some PD, definitely some professional development. Again, we need time to develop those partnerships with the community. It's just not automatic, hey, Delta, we're sending you 6 kids a day and have at it. It's really cultivating what that really looks like. And again, the system I come from, it took time, but it was glorious is really the word I think about when it truly kicked into place, and the back and forth and the professional skills those kids have time to develop. Yeah. And then, what was the last part here? Needing
alternating music and FIAD.
Yep. We're able to create those year-long courses by alternating some. So one day you've got your FIAD and then your music, so you're not just concentrating on your music during one semester and then not having it. So you're able to work on a number of classes like that. And students with special needs, same thing, you can create some skinnies smaller classes where they maybe have an extra transition, but they're able to get those services and not have an 86-minute class when the attention span and those things really kind of get in the way.
Before you leave that alternative, can you address how college in the schools or AP classes with their nationally timed testing would
Yes.
align to a block like this?
That's a limitation. We probably should have added that. It's a where I came from, we had the AP teachers, we laid out this 4x4 block, and they were able to choose based on their curriculum and how they taught and what they needed, whether it was all 4 or 3, first, second, and third quarter, or was it second, third, and fourth quarter, based on what that curriculum is. And based on that choice, we were able to manipulate the schedule for other elective options for kids. It's doable, it's tricky, but it's definitely a consideration to have extended time for those AP and CIS courses.
So that, just to make sure I understood what you were saying, is that those might look more like a 3 out of 4 quarter
correct
class rather than a two quarter class,
correct.
Which in turn for those students is a reduction in available electives.
That's the choice you make to take those classes. Yeah, might be an elective or two per year.
My personal experience is those kids are the most elective heavy classes, elective heavy students that you might see. So I would agree that's probably a limitation. That should be listed as limitation. And I would just, as we go forward, it would be something I'd be interested in learning more about if this goes forward.
So as we look at some of the dollar amounts,
Director Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question probably with a follow-up. So you mentioned just briefly there for a second incorporating these skinnies in, and you talked about it in terms of, it sounded like you're talking about in terms of, special ed, things like that, and situations like that. Do you have any concern, have you looked at the idea, there's certain things like some math classes, languages, it's how long? It's like an hour and a half, basically, right?
each class, yeah, anywhere from 82 to 86 minutes.
That could be a slog. I'm just thinking, that's long. So I guess my follow-up question to that is, depending on the class, depends on how tough that is on a kid going that long. So my follow-up is, have you spent any time with your team out at other schools where they've done this and looked at what the pluses, the pros and cons are from their perspective? And if so, which schools, who was your team? Was it a group of teachers / admin / students who went out on these tours? Because this is a very radical, block schedule would be a very radical shift is why I'm asking.
And similar to the middle school, that's the next step. And so the innovation team identified, we would love, depending on where we land or even before we land, let's send a small portion of the teams out to a number of schools that have similar schedules, because they're not, you can build any schedule. There are going to be limitations, positives, like you're seeing here with every schedule you want to build.
Got it.
And what, we've got a number of schools in the area that are looking to do what we're doing and transition from one to the other. So why are they transitioning from a 6-period to a block or block to something else because of the cost? So there's a number of districts around that are making changes currently, just like we're thinking about doing. Thank you. Yeah. Oops. So as we look at the costs, and I don't know if we mentioned it before, but we're basing the salary plus benefits on $93,000 per teacher as a district average. So that's where you're seeing these numbers from. I can't remember if we mentioned that earlier. We did? Okay. So with the 7-period day, it's really what we're doing now. Internal course changes, it's going to cost a little bit. And Chris, I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in there.
Yeah, I think it's just really looking like at the middle school, we can reallocate FTE, we can look at course options, we can go back and find out more from our community, from our parents, from our students. What are the courses they really want? How do we work that in? And so it may be something we can fit in with our current FTE, or it may be things that we're not considering yet and don't have the staffing, the licensure for that.
Yeah. And as we look at our core classes, math, science, social studies, English, math, make sure math, as our numbers in our we're above that Metro XU average right now, and to get anywhere close to where it's really comfortable in a classroom, to do those, we're reallocating, like you guys were talking about, FTE away from some areas that are not quite as full. So it's really taking that FTE and shifting it into possibly some core areas to get us maintaining closer to that 0 number. So there's your kind of your cost.
I'm sorry if I missed it. So we're talking about the 7-period day is our current structure.
Correct.
I didn't understand that as an alternative. So when you come down to this 7-period day with core class size reduction, so it wasn't presented as an option, but that's earlier in the presentation, but that's something that you're looking at, is driving core classes to a lower number of students.
Yeah, I think of the 3 options, this was our first option.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that there was an associated class size reduction. I thought it was just a presentation of the existing structure and its limitations. I'm sure that was my oversight. Thank you.
Then when it comes to the 6-period day, I had some experience with this in a prior district. Went from one schedule to the 6-period day. It does come with efficiencies. The struggle that we had is through those some of those efficiencies and licensure issues, it created part-time positions. And right now with our struggle of finding teachers for full-time positions, it'll be increasingly more difficult if we start offering more part-time positions. So you'll see the dollar amounts come from, we might need to add a 0.2 here just to attract a candidate, or a 0.4 here to attract a candidate, so that we can fill our positions. And that's where the estimations and dollar amounts are coming from there. In addition to other electives we may not be offering right now. Question.
Go ahead, Mark. Or Director Zuzek.
Thank you, Chair. Just thinking back to the back of the napkin math that we were doing the last time that we met about different schedules, I'm remembering that a 7-period day, the current high school schedule, a teacher stands in front of kids for 71% of the day. Mm-hmm. The block is a 3/4, so it's 75% of the day. Those two are really closely efficient. Mm-hmm. But if you go to a 6-period day, presuming a teacher teaches 5 of 6, you're at 83% of the day the teacher's in front of kids. And I think that my hypothesis is that when you sharpen the pencil, you're going to see that that's a huge savings, like probably 400,000 or better. So and I know that you've already said that's the work ahead of us, but when you do that work, I mean, the difference between a 6 and a 7 is a huge deal in regard to efficiency. I don't think I even have a question.
And then as you look at the block schedule, again, like Director Zuzek said, it is more efficient from 71 to 75. Teachers are in front of kids 3 out of 4 blocks a day. Again, that creates that common planning time and that extended time where we can have prep and a duty built into a specific block of the day. And then it creates the numbers based on our current FTE. It would be being able to reallocate about 3 FTE to, again, go up to the 7-period day, reduce some class sizes, and offer more options by reallocating some of that FTE that we're saving by becoming more efficient. And we don't have quite the issue you do with the 6-period day with the part-time positions as you're looking at those things. Yeah, correct.
I think we have a question from Director Tate.
I guess it's a question for both of the schools. What you've presented, is this the order of your preference, or no, or is it just random order? Random. Okay.
So for us, go ahead.
It's an order of cost.
Yeah,
at least with regard to middle school. Yeah, middle school builds. I think they spoke to that. They build. How would the high school consider this?
It really is just a presentation of all 3 alternatives or options that, including our current schedule, that the team said, let's explore. And again, coming up to us to put the dollar amounts to it with some assistance and presenting it to you to see what, again, this is, as we're going out to the community, here's what we're going to have to maybe switch and swap and move some FTE around and reallocate. Well, what does that take away from what we currently do? And what areas and what departments would see that reduction or shift, as we call it. So that's where these things come in.
So then do you have a preference on these options? Like, what's your top?
I would say I've had experience in 2 of the 3, and there's benefits. Obviously, we're seeing pros and cons of each. Based on the dollar amount, I guess we're really looking for the board's recommendation on what we think the community will support, because, and as you see, as we just go one more slide here, We're also in the position where outside of ESSER funds, there's a number of positions that are going away. So the supports that we need to make sure that our wellness, our mental health, our students are supported would, after this next school year, would be non-existent. We wouldn't have the funding or the personnel to do those positions. So the social worker piece, again, high school was able to have that added in this next year as we have it this year. After that, again, it would go away. Our student support piece, very similar to what the middle school is looking for, that MTSS, combo platter, restorative practices, reduction of suspensions, alternatives to suspensions, all of those things would be housed within at least a position. And then again, our staffing of our ALC is a tricky one because they're looking to expand the program. We built that space just a year ago to house more kids, to have more kids serviced. Our waiting list right now is 45 plus. Looking at how we can shift some kids in, but it's not you take a group of 30 kids, so you take a staff member. It's not that easy because the classes aren't 30 in an ALC, and I had 18 years of experience working in that programming, and you've got classes of 8, you've got classes of 15, 18 max, and then you're really getting to that point where the effectiveness of an alternative program kind of loses. So it's not a one-for-one switch from take some kids, move them, you take some staff and you move it. There's partial ratios, I guess you could call it. So as they're looking to add about a 1.2 or 1.5 FTE there, it's to provide some of those 45 kids that are just begging to get into something different because that's the way their brains work and that's how they can become most successful. There's an additional cost to that as well. So if we add it all up, high school, including the extra support staff, MTSS, ALC work, and social work, that's kind of what it boils down to based on your request to come up with the costing. And we'll come back to this again. Middle school, go ahead, Joe.
I have a question, and quite honestly, it might be for Superintendent McDowell. I'm not 100% sure. So I see the fourth bullet on the previous slide, staffing to Hastings Alternative Learning Center to accommodate more students. Well, I think that's a valid ask. I'm a little unclear how that falls into high school options. Because if we're talking about right now, today, there is a waiting list for that. And then this is a presentation about innovation that might be looking a couple of years out, quite honestly, because we're already scheduling kids for 23, 24. This feels like a disconnect to me between identifying a need in the Alternative Learning Center and putting it in an innovation presentation. So could I get some clarity on that? And the clarity might be you will get information later. I can appreciate that being the answer, but I'd see a disconnect in the information.
So I can start. I think I think you bring up a question that comes up of how and when do you do programming with the ALC when the ALC is truly a part of our high school experience, right? We've moved the ALC into the high school. The staffing for the ALC is built around high school students. When we staff, those students are Hastings kids. And so we staff based on that. And so adding this in seemed to make the most sense to us along with those other options that have become priorities with ESSER dollars. Because what we're trying to do along the way is ultimately keep more of our kids from going to 917 as an ALC option and staying with us. The continuum of that doesn't fit nicely in one side of the equation or the other. It works throughout it because right now, and we've had some board questions the past week, and we're in that weird spot where we've got kids that are going to the ALC already at 917 because that's where they started, that's where they found success, and quite frankly, we didn't have the ALC that could support them at the time. As those students move through the progression of their graduation or GED or whatever their experience is, and we have now the ability for our incoming 9th graders and 10th graders that we can then start programming for as Hastings ALC students, that shift of we start with this amount of kids and we move to this amount of kids. In the experiences that we've had, we'll move to, we've got more of a standard number of kids throughout the totality of the school year. And so it should equalize out the FTE. I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think it's important that we keep the ALC a part of whatever conversation we're having with the totality of programming, even if it seemingly doesn't exactly fit, because there's going to be some related costs and related FTE pieces that go with ALC programming.
It's midnight. Oh, go ahead.
If I can, I think it's also important to talk about how do we meet their core curricular needs while still offering them all the benefits that we're looking at for these exploratory learning options and getting into some more career-related courses. And how do we start blending some of that together to meet their needs, keep them motivated, keep them engaged, and moving toward graduation.
Yeah, we've become even more efficient with the staff literally walking through a door instead of driving across town, as well as, again, those kids are able to take courses ALC, and then we're back in the building doing some dual enrollment blended learning in our building. We don't have an auto shop in the ALP. Mm-hmm. We don't have real solid art yet. We're getting close. Those hands-on courses that they typically choose are within the same constructed building, separate program. So we've got that ability too. And so we're going to see, again, a number of students stay versus look elsewhere.
Okay, I think that answers a portion of the question. I guess the heart of my concern, and I'll just express it as a concern and we don't have to extend the conversation. I agree, and I think investing in the Alternative Learning Center at the high school while creating a singular supportive space and giving some options to access facilities, that was definitely a decision I support, and I think it's going to provide us benefits in the long run, and it's going to provide our students benefits in the long run. I think what caught my eye here is current students that are wanting to be in a different learning environment. I want those students' needs met now, possibly yesterday. And I don't see those, so I don't, that piece of meeting current students who are looking for a home, like a safe learning home. I don't want that student to be told, we are really seriously considering developing something like that with our innovation team. I want them to be finding a home, whatever that looks like. So as long as, and maybe I just tied two threads together, and I see you all nodding, so I know that those students are being cared for now, but I just have that transitional, I think it's maybe a now and future concern.
And the request for ALC placement is kind of ebbs and flows, and specifically coming out of COVID, we've got a number of students who are kind of looking at the light at the end of the tunnel is so far away, I need to do something else in a different location. Having 7 classes and, having either failures or missing, gaps in their education, it's really what else can be provided in district to be able to get back to on track to graduate or actually hit the finish line. Those are the kind of kids that are on that waiting list right now. And I give credit to our counselors and Todd Levis over at our TOSA lead over at the ALP. He is, with the counselors' input, they are looking at their waiting list, and if, things fluctuate all the time. Kids come off, kids are added, and what's that priority, and who's a senior, and who's getting close, and all of those things. It's a juggling act like you've never seen, and they're able to, again, pinpoint those kids who need it now versus somebody, hey, we're going to kind of struggle through and get some intervention before we're able to get you in there because we're limited on space and staffing.
All right, thank you. Sorry for hijacking the conversation. We can return to the presentation that you'd prepared. Director Dressley.
How many students does the ALC currently, how many students can you guys accommodate at the ALC?
I think right
currently?
now it's in the low 30s. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. And there's if you're not aware, there's a couple of part-time staff, and then the rest are part-time high school, part-time ALP in transition.
I just wanted to answer the Director Tate's question from if we had a preference from the middle school. We hadn't gotten to that yet. We built from current schedule with some. And so I bring it back to our buckets and what came out of the surveys and what came out of the students. And so our preference is the one that provides the most exploratory options while also creating those pods and teams of teachers with common planning time, and that is the 7-period day schedule. So any option that can... Yeah. Well, no, you asked what would our preference be, and so that is our preference. We know it comes with a price tag, and so any way we can add exploratories to a middle school schedule, build a team in a pod, is a preference for us.
You got next slide for your finals.
And then just like the high schools, we added in those MTSS and math intervention. So that's why our totals are a little different than they were on the first couple slides. So.
Are there any additional questions at this time? Dr. Mom?
And I don't expect anybody to have this answer right now, but just looking at the impact of classroom size too. And I know it was briefly discussed at the beginning, I think at the high school level. But that's something that I want to be very much aware of. And if we're seeing a decrease, obviously that's a huge benefit, but I would not want to go any higher. So I imagine you're already taking that into consideration with all these options.
Yeah, just one thing to remember, just the core is an average. So obviously we have classes that are larger than that average and a few that are below. So it's we balance the best we can with the FT we're given it. It's always a struggle. That's what we do. But
Superintendent McDowell?
So I think to kind of put a bookend on this for you, one of the things is why have this level of presentation to the school board and quite frankly to the community is to understand costing that goes along with what if we do something different. What does that look like? The past 3 years, we've already had the presentations on. We've made right sizing adjustments. We've reduced budgets. We've tried to take money and create efficiencies out of our overall expenditures. What does that look like? That looked like years ago moving to the 6-period day at the middle school, right? It looks like keeping class sizes where they are at the elementaries, but the secondary, we bump those core class size averages up a little bit. Why does all that become important? Because it all dovetails back again with, we have a referendum coming up in renewal in November. This is the important time to have these discussions around what does this look like? What do we want it to look like? What direction does the board want to give the administration? Because as you've seen, for example, the high school can continue doing what it's doing and have no cost to it, additional costs to it, right? It can continue doing what it's doing. The middle school can continue doing what it's doing and have no cost to it, essentially, additional cost to it. But as we've said before, we're to that spot as a district where there isn't a lot of gray area in that. To do a little bit more is going to cost, which means we either have to bring in more annual revenue or we have to utilize fund balance dollars that are treated as one-time dollars and eventually disappear. That's why all of it fits together as part of that toolbox that I've been talking about with the school board. You've got some big decisions to make coming up as we approach November with a renewal and what else? Because the only other what else are the options that we've talked about as you move through your future discussions around, do you put something on a ballot? Do you not? Do you keep doing what you're doing? The hope for tonight was to give you that first blush of, here's the range of what, the magnitude of what some of this stuff costs. And hopefully the why, the why of, we don't just throw it out there to say something like, you may have to consider a renewal plus something. The reason plus something, as you saw even with middle school, that's upwards of almost $1 million a year to do that. That's an annual $1 million a year to keep that going. And where does that money come from? And is that something that we want the Hastings community to grapple with and say, yeah, that's important to us. It's important to us to give those exploratory options. And then as a school board, be able to say, if it is, here's what we're going to ask you to do. Because you've got to have A in order to move down the path of B. And so that's the why. That's the why of the timing of to try and get this out. It isn't tonight to try and decide something, because it's a lot to digest. And I know during the week there's been a lot of questions, but we have to start throwing this stuff out there, because otherwise people will make up what they think is this way or that way. And this at least gives us some common talking points, and you as a board to be able to take the next step and go, okay, based on what I saw, what if, or like the questions that started tonight, what's your priority? Which is what these gentlemen and Rachel Larson have those innovation teams poised to do next, is to go back to them and say, all right, we presented to the board like we thought. The next question is, if you had to choose, which one would you do and why? That's what I take away from this conversation and just hearing, is that's probably, they were right on board with that line of thought. And so that's what would be the natural next step, is to be able to say, here's what our priority would be. Here's what some of the electives would be if we were going to do that type thing, and get some of those specifics for you. Because as you're talking with the public, then if this is a road you want to go down, that's what you're going to need as board members, to have that conversation and say, yeah, it would give our kids this, this, and this. And maybe it's important, and maybe it's not as important, but at least you'll have that information to talk to people about.
Well, and one of the things that we've talked about very recently, and I know Director Tate, this is kind of a hot topic for you, is that experiential learning. So seeing, what opportunities presented tonight would allow our students to explore those alternative methods of learning, on-the-job training, whatever it may be. There's a lot of opportunity, but to Superintendent McDowell's point, it's going to cost money. I would love, and I know we have some programs out there, but apprenticeships. How cool would it be to have our students come out of their senior year and they're right in there working HVAC, working plumbing, and those are trades that right now we need them. And I think that is done through the innovation team. So this presentation, all the work that you're doing to give these options to our students. But the experiential learning, that's the big, I took a lot out of this tonight, but the experiential learning really, I saw a lot of opportunity in there, and that is really exciting. But understanding too that if this is something that the community supports, we're gonna have to fund it. I don't know what that looks like yet, but we'll find out soon.
So not seeing any other hands around the table, and I did talk to Superintendent McDowell ahead of time to make sure I understood what next steps meant and what kind of direction you were hoping to get, and how this aligned to the referendum renewal work that's ongoing and that we'll hear about in a couple of weeks on the community survey, as we understand community tolerance and we understand kind of how this just how this all starts to align, and we look at scenarios and we accept what our willingness as a board is to live out of our fund balance, and how long that is, and how big a risk takers we are, and there's multiple moving parts right now. This feels like a hard time to say next steps, but I do think to Dr. McDowell's point and some of the questions that came up here tonight, I think what I hear is the middle school is quite clear on what would be their preferred alternative. And that's very understandable. I think there's notable difference between the three alternatives that were presented. I'm not clear what would be a good next step for that, other than maybe to survey schools, see what potential electives would be, just consider some of that. I would think at the high school level, I would be interested, and this is a takeoff of Director Davis's point, I think the board would be interested in saying, if a small team went and visited sites that are currently in operation or have recently left or moved to the alternatives that we are not currently running, and that pros and cons, that strengths and limitations was more fleshed out and possibly rose to a point of a recommendation. I think that feels like a reasonable next step. I would be interested maybe from Dr. McDowell if there's a timeline for that, because we're looking at getting community survey back here in the 10th of May. I think we have to, you can remind me of when we have to approve the ballot language. But I think somewhere before that, obviously we have to be able to talk to our community about this is what our staff and community have said they care about.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. One is, if my guess will be is that the high school team, probably as early as tomorrow, will start to look at, it won't be hard to organize getting people to these different sites before school's out. There's a lot of schools that are running these models that are close to us. That'll happen. What we believe, based on the next taxation information, looking over to make sure I'm saying right, I think I mentioned last board meeting, we're actually thinking that might not come in until the end of June, first week of July. So it's probably going to be more likely that as a board, you gained a little bit of a reprieve from having to make a decision at the board meeting in June. And it's probably going to either need to be a special meeting in the early part of July, or wait till that July meeting to actually if you're going to put a ballot question on, to make that decision of what that looks like. Because you're not going to want to do that until we have the final taxation piece, because otherwise you're not going to know what to tell people. So that's the timeline. So it gives us a little bit of extra wiggle room from a board decision. But I think what's going to happen is in the next 5-6 weeks, all the information is going to be in there for you, except for that one final piece. And then it's going to be thinking and rethinking and talking and retalking about what feels right, so that when we do get that last piece of information in, you're willing and able to say, yep, we've talked about it. If it comes in this way, we're doing this. If it comes in this way, we're doing this. And it's just a matter of having the public vote on it at that point, in the public vote.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Do you have any other questions for us, or things that you were hoping to hear tonight, or direction? Okay. No further questions around the table at this time, Director Davis?
It's just more of a request. So as all of you, by the way, thank you for all your work. This could not have been easy. This must have taken forever. I can't even imagine, so thank you. Just, I would encourage you as you're going forward to, as people are looking into all these things for you, just get as wide a range of voices as you can. I'm sure that math teachers think different than science teachers, think different than language teachers, think different than English teachers. The best you can, get the best mosaic as you can when they're looking into these things. That I wish you a lot of luck, and I can't wait to hear what happens next. Thanks.
And I probably can speak for the middle school. The makeup of both of our teams has exactly what you just mentioned. It is very intentional that we have all voices at the table, and that's one of the reasons we're not locked into an option A, B, or C right now. This is as transparent as can be, and what are the potential funding mechanisms to support each one of those schedules, and we'll do all the background information and research we can, and again know how it works, and what, again, more limitations and pros and cons for each of those three options, particularly for the high school. So we're ready to go.
Director Malm?
I apologize. I promise I'm done after this. So a few, just thinking about what the next steps are, and it expands beyond you. The community, and I was thinking about the electives, and I know what would be desirable for myself, but I'm one of 22,000 people that, if not more, that are a part of this decision. So when I was thinking about, what electives would we need to bring in, obviously that's a management thing, but it also, the community, the students, the teachers. So I want to know what is the community willing to support, but that's where all the board members come into play too, with all of our folks, our circles that we communicate with, understanding what the community is willing to support. And then I was thinking a little bit further too, is, with all these options, they're great. Is there a combination of options that meet both, the three desirable? Is it desirable? I think all of them are feasible with a cost affiliated. And then is it sustainable? And looking at the long term, 3 years to 20 years down the road, is this something that we can sustain as a community given our current knowns? So those are just some questions that I have in the back of my head that are, again, wish you luck. Wish us luck too.
Yeah, and I would say, Director Malm, that a number of those questions around assessing desirability, feasibility, sustainability, those will be conversations at this table, and they will align directly with a conversation about the referendum. And they will trade off with the one-time money that's available in our general fund reserve right now. That'll be our discussion, and I think your point is very valid that the electives that would be provided is be a decision at the sites based on student interest and that kind of thing. But it would be part of that assessment to understand what other districts have found desirable and successful, that their students have found interesting. All right. Seeing no further questions, I'm going to just not look around the table. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for your time, both tonight, and thank your teams for us. All right, the next item on our agenda for tonight for information is the 917 update. I've attached the board notes from the April meeting. Our May meeting will be next week. I'll just leave them there for the board to read. I did mention to Director Zuzek the other day, I can tell spring is coming because my calendar is filling up with 917. 917 is very student focused, and they're very celebratory focused, and they're getting parties on the calendar. That's all I can tell you. We got parties on the calendar starting this week, celebrating the end of the school year. So, next, we have our policy committee update, which I believe is being led by Vice Chair Malm, but I'm willing to stand corrected if necessary.
All right, so there's, if you take a look at the notes, a lot of what we went through are already in our policies for first read, second read, et cetera. And those specifics I'm going to go through as we're going through the policies, if you would just entertain that. Because there were some questions that came up with it and feedback that I want to make sure that they are housed with those particular policies just for flow of information. What you will not see for first reading tonight is policy 618 with grading. And so we discussed where this policy came from and if it still provides value to the district. So it just came up in because of the 3-year cycle, and it's the remaining of our 600 series policies from, I believe, last year. This policy does provide continuity and value to the district, even though it is ISD 200 specific. There is not an MSBA model policy on grading. The administration and policy committee, we discussed bringing grading under review, but that would be approached very similar to the programmatic reviews. Because it's a lengthy discussion, it would have to be a large group, committee, lots of reviewing to work through that. In order to do that, if this is something that the board would feel is necessary to take on right now, we would, it would have to be, the board would have to direct that to administration to take on grading. There are a few edits, you know, as we're going through it, we're like, you know, there's really no changes right now pending direction from the board. But as we're going through it, we're like, yeah, there's maybe a few edits and formatting we should probably take a look at just to clean it up. So you will see that, but also renumbering it to maybe like 6:30, because as we are using, you know, the MSBA model policies, we want to make sure that the policies that we have are reflective of what MSBA also has, just for continuity purposes. So Director Tate did ask a question, which I really appreciate, because the summary did not provide that information. So she had asked, why does the grading system need to be reviewed? And my response to her was, it's a policy that came up at our last meeting, and part of the conversation was that we could and probably should at some point in the future audit how we grade and assess if we need to approach grading differently. The reason for that is to ensure that grading is done with fidelity and clarity throughout the system. Make sure that it is, you know, that we are closing that gap with grading. I don't know how else to explain that other than we need to just provide clear fidelity to the grading system that we currently have. Let me see. Policies 908, 209, and 212. So that will go to our May 3rd agenda for review. And then you will likely, hopefully, see those on the agenda for first read at our May meeting. So thank you to the board for all of your comments. It was really helpful as we are going through these, just that very direct feedback from the entire team. We did change we canceled our meeting for today. It was just too much. It was a lot. So we moved it from today to May 3rd, and that is at 4 p.m. And then if you're ready, we can go into the next policies. So we're going line by line. Okay. So for first read, we have policy 516. Sorry, I gotta pull up my notes here. So in February of 2023, MSBA policy newsletter came out with a model policy 516.5, which is overdose medication. 516.5 is not a mandatory policy, and the committee, along with administration, we discussed do we need to have a separate policy for overdose medication, or is this something that we can put into 516? So adding in verbiage for Narcan and epinephrine into policy 516, section 3, paragraph E. Director Tate did send me an email, and I bring this up because I want to make sure the whole board is aware of it. I know that we've had discussions, and you'll see this throughout the policies that we are going to be discussing here. A lot of it is the continuous conversation, be it from the committee meeting or, you know, the board as a whole. So I just want to make sure that for transparency purposes and so everybody's on the same page, that it's talked about. So Director Tate had asked, or making a recommendation to separate, essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, the epinephrine from the Narcan. And so having it as a standalone, and I do understand what you're saying. So because the verbiage in that section 3, paragraph E is, pertaining to overdoses. So we will take that into consideration at our next meeting, and maybe it's just adding a separate paragraph for that. That is what we have for policy 516 changes, pending your feedback and recommendations.
Director Bison.
So I see that students carry an EpiPen, so we'll have Epi as well somewhere in the nurse's office with the Narcan. And then who is going to be the trained staff? Who decides that? Just the nurse, or the nurse decides who is going to be administering and training?
Yeah, so it'll be coordinated through Mary Ellen.
The Director of Health Service.
Yep, director. Well, in our case, our lead nurse will help decide who exactly is going to be trained to officially be able to deliver it.
Just for reference, I know the 516 policy for 917 has a EpiPen paragraph.
Oh, it does.
That's separate. That might be something to reference, something to potentially look at. 917 also chose to incorporate Narcan directly into 516 and not as a MSBA model or a standalone. Upon further consideration, if somebody identifies a comment or a concern, please provide that to all policy committee members so that they can bring it back into their committee discussion, and we just provide it as a piece of data, not an ongoing conversation back and forth, but a piece of information provided for the committee to consider.
Moving on to policy 603, which for our folks, is curriculum development. For this policy, we don't recommend any changes at this time. Director Tate did make a recommendation. I believe it was 2 recommendations. Yep. And looking at section 3, paragraph B, with a recommendation to include language, about having a committee that is comprised of individuals with varying viewpoints to ensure the opportunity for a diversification of opinion. And I'm thinking, I know what you're getting at too, and I don't know how we can, I think the maybe the most manageable way to consider that is kind of like with our other policies, is to add in like very specific composition of a committee. So, having the director of teaching and learning, and I'm just making up numbers right now, but 2 licensed teachers, 2 community members. And I'm thinking, because when I look at varying viewpoints and diversification of opinion, it's difficult to identify. So how do you vet those individuals? So I wonder if there's a way that can be developed to be more specific of, okay, you're going to pull from this group, you're going to pull from this group to create this committee, so that it's not so subjective. Do you want to comment on that at all?
I guess my fear is that, yes, you can pull people from who have different responsibilities within the community, within the district, but in something like curriculum, if they're all very like-minded and aligned, you're not going to get the, I think, the robust conversation that needs to happen around this specific type of content. So that's my ultimate concern. So anyway, that's it.
Yeah, I'm going to say one thing, then I'm going to turn it to Superintendent McDowell, and then we'll go back to you. I understand the intent. I think what everybody needs to reflect on, and this will be next taken at the policy committee meeting, is how to operationalize that. It's the same question that we had with regard to superintendent selection. How do you decide which stakeholders are represented and at the table? And so, while I think your intent is understood, I think the question is how to operationalize it, if that's a value that we want to bring forward. So just think about that component of it and consider how that might look. Superintendent McDowell?
Yeah, just 2 things. One, the verbiage that's in section 3, part B, is taken almost verbatim out of statute. Comes out of 120B.11, subdivision 3. And I think it's important to maybe spend a little time on just having clarity around definitions of words, because what is in there, and it says the district advisory committee, to the extent possible, shall reflect the diversity of the district. So I think we need to have a conversation about what is meant by diversity, right? Diversity is not limited to one thing. The idea of the way it's worded and worded carefully and what it shall reflect from the district is exactly that. So I would agree with you that I guess I would just put out there, I don't know that it needs a change in verbiage. I think it needs some clarity in what is meant by that piece, because it is relative. It comes right out of statute.
Sorry. Section 3F, and it was just a verbiage recommendation. So striking periodically and adding all. My response is we'll bring that to the committee meeting next Wednesday and take a look at that. Other than that, I mean, this is first read, so if you have any other recommendations as you're reviewing these policies, please feel free to send an email to the policy committee. We'd appreciate that.
All right, it's still you, 616.
Sure is. Um, 616, recommending no changes to this policy at this time. So Director Tate did send an email inquiring about the language that is struck in the policy. Yes, and the summary does not go over that very well. So most of the items struck in this policy are actually housed in the 600 series policies or in statute. What we're really working on in policy is taking a look at, oh my goodness, we have a lot of redundancy. We need to maybe refocus and strike that redundancy, and taking the procedures out of the policy. So that is where you see that. And I apologize for not having the summary reflect that. If you have any other questions though too, I'm going to put her on the spot, but Ms. Larson is here and available to kind of explain that further if you need further clarification. But yes, it is struck because of redundancy, and then also some of it is procedure.
I can't tell who wants to speak at this table. You guys sort it
Just
out.
real quick, at the end of the policy, right before the legal references, it says that the procedures for this policy are laid out in policy 601, and they really are just perfectly aligned, and that's why we didn't have it in both, because if you change your procedure, you have to go back and change the policy, and it gets to be pretty cumbersome to do that in two policies instead of one.
Director Dressler.
I'm just requesting that we have the notes that reflect that, just because of the fact that if somebody goes back, somebody's going to say, when did we move this to, or this to, when did we take this out? When did this happen? So, thank you.
So I would anticipate in the May 3rd meeting minutes, it'll be captured that this was it for clarification.
But I'm asking this, I'm not saying it. Do we intend to include the phrase that's typed in red? These procedures for this, the procedures for this policy are laid out in policy 601, right? And then your comment is, let's make sure that we capture when that move happened. Thank you.
Questions, statements that kind of blend together? Okay. Are there any further questions on 616? All right, next we'll move to the items on second reading.
All right, for second reading, we have policy 206. So we did our first reading in March. This policy was reviewed and we weighed. There was a lot of feedback from the community and from board members. So thank you to everybody that is present and online to our community members. This is, I'm seeing a lot of feedback on more so than I have in the past years on policies. So it's really cool to see that that feedback come in. Yeah, the level of people reaching out. So that's really neat. So I do want to note too, and I don't know why it took me so long to realize this. So I feel like I owe everybody an apology. But with 206, I know that there's been a lot of discussion about, taking procedures out of policy. And so what does that look like in reference to policy 206? So we have talked about there is sometimes going to be vague verbiage in a policy, and that is to ensure that we are not limiting ourselves, especially when it comes to procedural matters. So whether or not it's streamed, whether or not it's recorded, that is procedural. And in my mind, I'm thinking this is something that belongs in the handbook for the board handbook. We will be televising this, and I think it belongs, and I'm open to opinions too. I don't think it belongs in policy, again, because of limitations. If we put in policy that we're not going to stream it, then you have to go back and review policy and bring it back for multiple reads. If for some reason you want to then stream the public comment. So that is really important to note in here. And the same thing with the 15 minutes prior to a meeting. We did not specify a time in there because in the event that, and I remember prior to me coming on the board, they had meetings on Thursdays, and it had to shift back and forth a little bit. Sometimes, correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think it was Thursday, but it was a different start time.
It was a different start. Yeah, so by adding those specifics, so if we say 15 minutes prior to the start of our board meeting, then if we start at 5 p.m., it would be 4:45, and we're not locking ourselves in for a 6 p.m. start time, if that makes sense. So that is why sometimes we see vague verbiage, is because we don't want to be locked into something that really puts us in a pickle. That's all I have on this one. The recommendation is to keep the policy as is written, and to with the current proposed changes, and then to move that to let's see, the second read, we could move it to next month for approval.
Director Tate.
Chair.
Oh. Is it, okay, I'm sorry, I already acknowledged Director Tate. I think I said it out loud.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
I intended, and I got you next.
Thanks.
I guess just one thing, I thought that we had discussed as a board, the 200 series specifically would have the procedures included in them just because they are owned by us, essentially. So now we're backing away from that a little bit. I guess I'm wondering if we should just make sure that everybody's on board with the handbook piece versus having it in policy, because that was my understanding anyway. So I just want to be clear on that. And then, so that's one. But then the other thing, and this is related but not in here, I think if we do end up going forward with this structure where we have it beforehand and not televised, I strongly believe that in the agenda we still need to have a summary session so that people can hear the summary of what was brought forward to the entire board. So I guess, so yeah, so first one is just, are we okay not having the full procedure included in 206 or other 200s?
So I acknowledge Director Zuzik, then I'm going to acknowledge myself, and then I'm going to go back to you. So.
My comment was exactly your second comment regarding the policy as written is silent on whether or not there's a summary, because there's no need to summarize it if it's been streamed in part of the meeting. So, or not, it won't be, if it's recorded and streamed.
So I think the policy is silent right now on streaming at all. And it speaks to the point that I think was really relevant, that was raised by Ms. Doran from MSBA, which is over time we moved from things were never streamed, and people had to show up. They had to show up at the meetings, they had to show up at committee meetings. Then as facilities modified and some communities have the capacity to stream their own events, some communities have relationships with local media entities, some have other things, communities build an expectation. We don't have a policy that says our meetings will be streamed. We have a working agreement with a local community TV station, but we don't have a standing practice that will be true, and that could change should our relationship with them change, or we could get bumped for a super exciting girls softball game. So there's not I know it's before the meeting and not televised, but I think to the point that Vice Chair Malm was making is that the understanding of what's televised and what's not televised is not a policy question. It's a current practice question. And correct me if I'm wrong in that. Thank you.
No, that is correct. That was what I was trying to communicate. And I admit that my memory is not the greatest. So if I don't remember having a conversation that the 200 series policies would have the procedures in there, and maybe I can see where there are places where it would be appropriate, but I also see some procedures that it would be more appropriate in the board handbook. So I'm open. I think policy committee, we're open to what maybe it comes down to, because I know we have requested at a future work session, hopefully sooner rather than later, to go over the procedures. Maybe that's where we have that conversation and say, okay, now that we're diving into the procedures, is this something that we maybe feel belongs in policy, or does this belong in a handbook, or do we have our own procedural book? Maybe that's the time that we have that conversation.
So, all right, I have two things to say to that. I'm looking at the wrong document. I have a recollection, which clearly I think means we need to have a board discussion about and get on the same page. That's kind of in between the two, which is that in general, the policy committee was going to work to get procedures out, and they were going to move towards having a policy number whatever that would be an administrative procedure to support the associated policy, and that would be, my understanding is that would be less strongly enforced as we went through the 200s. Not that it would be not a goal, but that it would be less strongly enforced. To Director Malm's point, we've all seen how long it takes to make a change once it's in policy, and if we want to change a procedure and a practice, especially if the practice is out of our hands, if it's something being done by an outside entity in support of the currently in support of the community and the board, it would be potentially unwise to embed a procedure that we can't control or that could likely cost us some dollars into a policy. So I think there's a little bit of a land. I will say, and maybe this is a discussion for a future, I believe this is a discussion for a very short-term work session. It is a struggle to move that discussion about handbook into a meeting that soon. I think it ends up being a July at the earliest time frame, and that's driven by who's available and by the fact that, and even July I think might be a little bit of a push, who's available and just how much work there is to be done. So I suspect it's a July-August timeframe. And if you understood that was the time, I hope you understood that was the timeframe. I don't see it getting on the board's work calendar prior to that. Okay.
I want it on next week.
Okay, let's start our meeting at 2. We're going to keep adding items. Okay, I just wanted a common understanding on that. So I think that's going to be a place for that, where we get a little clarity on our understanding of that and the time when we can do that. And I'm gonna pencil it in right now for July.
Can I say one more thing?
Please do.
This is more for Director Zusick and Director Dressley. Maybe next Wednesday we can have a brief discussion about that in preparation for the more robust discussion. I'd like to put that maybe on the agenda if you're comfortable with that.
Got a couple ideas.
Awesome.
Director Tate. I have the wrong.
I guess I'd like to make an official request to add in that the agenda reflects some sort of a summary. Just because we've gotten a lot of emails about this specific concern. And I think just to reassure everyone that they will be heard and if people aren't in the room, they will be able to see the televised summary of the public comment.
So here's my concern about that. Minutes reflect actions, they don't reflect discussions. And I want us to be careful about that. The whole discussion is available on tape and will be recorded. Unless I misunderstood your request.
I'm requesting that that it be added into the policy that the agenda reflects, or that the agenda continues to have a summary of the public comment in it, so that part is televised, the summary.
So we can't promise that our meetings will be televised into the future. I want us to be careful about that. 2, we already have a policy that's with regard to agenda. So if we're going to make a modification about the agenda, that needs to happen in the agenda policy about the agenda, which is another 200 series policy. So that's going to go. I forget the number, but it is a standalone policy.
It's 203.
203.
And it's already in there. So
and it's listed as listening set. It's listed as sessions, the summary. So if we don't change it, it's already in there. Seeing no further discussion on 206. Given that there's not anticipated to be a notable change, it would come back as an action item.
Yeah.
In a future meeting, because that's the next place. Where we talk about it coming back in a 3rd, 4th, or some innumerable reading is when we identify notable changes.
Yeah, okay.
So with that, speaking of multiple readings, I think we're on to 4th reading.
Yes.
I think earlier today I referred it to like, we're on the 17th reading of policy 601. That's not true. But it definitely feels like it. It's 18. Thank you, Ms. Larson. All right. Policy 601. So we heard from a few folks at our March 29th work session, our work session about the innovative team, which kind of helped me frame my mind about policy 601 as we went into our oh my gosh, sorry, I am tired already. Our policy committee meeting. Thank you. So we briefly discussed it again tonight with the experiential learning. So we added into policy 601 verbiage that aligns with world's best workforce and included a statement not about experiential learning, but about inclusive educational programming. So if you take a look at section 4, paragraph 4, it's just a few words. Yep, if you scroll up, it's in pink. If you go right, 4A, I apologize. So scroll down. Down. Stop. Sorry. 4A. Okay. Change my note here. Do you want to go ahead, Director Zuzak?
I'm just going to comment that the reason that we felt like that was really important as a policy committee is that we're not continuing policy 604, and the entirety of 604 is about inclusive educational programming, and it is in Minnesota rule that we attend to that. And so you'll see it down in the legal references, you'll see it here, and then that we wanted to make sure that it was also there in definitions. But we had forgotten the importance of if we're going to crash or close out policy 604, we need to carry that language because it's a responsibility of ours to attend to the state's demands.
What I appreciate about the policy committee is that you beat me to the punch. Thank you. No, that's great, because you do see on the agenda that we're going to recommend that policy 604 get taken out. And the reason for that is because it is housed within 601. Go ahead.
And some also, some staff policies too about inclusive practices and student policies about inclusive practices. It's a really broad practice, or really broad policy.
Okay. Director Tate did ask a question, and this has been brought to the table previously, is adding language, not about gifted and talented, but about adding additional language about how we're pushing higher achieving students. And then, do you mind if I just read what, okay. So she writes that I've stated that I would prefer administration develop the language, as I'm not familiar with what is currently being done in this area or how exactly something like that should be worded. So I've only, and correct me if I'm wrong too, again, memory is not the greatest. I've only heard that ask from you and haven't heard a consensus from the board or the administration to elaborate on that piece. But I also think back to the innovation team and that experiential learning is, maybe it's the gray area in the curriculum and what our teachers are doing, that professional development that builds upon that added challenge that, I don't know how we would define that right now. I don't have much else to say on that, other than I don't know if it's needed and necessary at this time. So I'll just leave it at that. So the recommendation is to move the policy to approval with the minor edits that we saw tonight, and then that we can move this to an action item, pending questions.
Director Tate?
Yeah, I guess I would appreciate an answer as far as why we wouldn't want to have language in here about pushing the kids who are strong academically, but not identified as gifted and talented.
Director Susan.
Again, much of this policy is based on statute and state rule, and the milestone language about literacy is addressed like in pretty fine grain, and that's probably why the question comes up, why don't we have something over on this side? But the point is that the processes for identifying kids for whether it's gifted and talented or just differentiated instruction because of their skill level or their achievement level really isn't in statute. It's not an expectation of the state. It's not a mandatory expectation in rule or statute, and it is an expectation of our district. And so if you look at Roman numeral 4A2, it does talk about a process to assess and evaluate each student's process toward meeting state and local academic standards, assess and identify students for participation in gifted and talented programs, and accelerate their instruction, adopt procedures for early admission into kindergarten, first grade gifted and talented learners, which are sensitive to underrepresented groups, on and on and on. I mean, I understand the hope that we have a robust program, and I expect that we do have a robust program, and I know that Director Larson has said that she would come back and present to us what that is, but I know that it also changes over time, and so if it goes into policy, it's not as nimble. And it's not in statute and it's not in rule.
Director Tresley.
But I can agree with the concept is that we want to be raising all students up, obviously. I mean, that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to raise all students up and get all students to the best level of achievement that they can obtain. How you put that in this policy, I don't know. I don't know that, but I do know that that is, all of us around the table want to see all kids raised up and achieve.
Yeah, I think that's Roman numeral 4, A dash, and then numeral 3, talking about a system to periodically review and evaluate the effectiveness of all instruction and curriculum, taking into account strategies, practices, student outcomes, etc.
This time I would entertain a motion in a second to advance this policy to a action item tonight, given that it's in the 4th or higher reading.
I would make the motion.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Motion carries unanimously. Don't be gone long.
I won't. I'm going to be really quick.
Okay. Next item was a modification from earlier in the night. I don't believe that it, as it's currently was added, discussion regarding sexually explicit materials in schools is completely accurate. My understanding of the motion was to understand the next step or the identified perceived inconsistencies in next steps. Okay. I guess I'll start the discussion off. We had a discussion around the table at the February 8th work session following a request at a previous meeting, and it felt very clear to me at that meeting that we had not consistent viewpoints. There were materials provided by primarily Director Tate. I think we got a few sheets from Director Dressley as well, but I think the bulk of them was Director Tate. I understood or recall that the question was asked regarding next steps, and as I recall, the answer at that time was the next step, that there was not a next step as there was not consensus in the room. And should there be any changes in the future, if there was a consistent voice, it would begin at policy, because that's sort of the 606 are the policies that currently contain our guidelines and then the associated supporting procedures to that policy. I guess I was surprised, given that I've provided emails in response to community questions since February. I'm surprised that this came up tonight as an identified inconsistency that's been going out for a few months, but Director Tate, and we're gonna for sure wait for Director. Hey, go ahead.
I just want to make one correction on the summary. When I had asked for next steps at the February 8th meeting, it had been indicated that Director Dressley should bring it back to the policy committee.
That was not my understanding. My recollection is quite strong that it was, in the event that there was a next step, it would come from the policy committee when there was a consistent voice. There was no identified consistent voice in that room to modify the policy. I believe during the motion, Director Malm, that you had a recollection of that evening with regard to next steps that were identified at the February work session.
Yeah, vaguely. In that mainly there was no direction. So the way that I'm understanding it is there are essentially 4 different ways that policy would get reviewed. So it's the 3-year review cycle, which we all know. MSBA model policy changes, the newsletters that we receive in July and February, usually. legislative changes, and then by majority vote of the board to direct policy to take something on. I did not hear a consensus. I did not hear, I know there was discussion that, you know, is this something that policy could take on? The answer is always yes. Is it something that the majority of the board supports? And that was completely not clear, which to me means that no, unless there's a clear message that says, okay, this needs to go to policy by majority vote, then, and that didn't happen.
Director Tate.
So to be clear, though, I had passed out a significant amount of information with obviously the board not having a chance to read it during the meeting. So obviously, once you've actually read this, I would hope that you would have a decision. You know, there wasn't a clear decision, but as I said, I would hope that you, after reading that, you would have a yes or no either way. And so that's why I asked for this discussion tonight. So the fact is, this is a national issue that is a concern to a lot of parents, and it's our job to tackle difficult issues, and I see this as being one. And, you know, I remember Director Davis had asked the question if there's a way for parents who don't want their kids to have access to this sexually explicit material, if there's a way to do that. And the answer was no, that would be very difficult. So I think that there's, you know, I had provided in the documents an option of a starting point for the policy committee for discussion. And I think that just freely allowing this material to be accessible to students, if parents are strongly opposed and not having any way of preventing that.
I would point out that we are not having a conversation about the materials in schools. We're having a conversation about next steps.
Correct, and I'm trying to state my case as far as why I believe there needs to be next steps instead of simply ignoring the concerns of the community.
I feel that you're coming back to the heart of the conversation, which we had in February, and we have a different memory of the end of that meeting. We are not re-articulating that meeting at this time. There was a difference in understanding. Again, I have been providing responses to the community since February, so I'm surprised that this came today as something that you didn't recognize we had the same understanding of. But we are not having that conversation. So I've heard a couple different takes on that. Director Dressley.
I believe the reason that it was brought up today is because until April, we weren't allowed to add stuff to the end of the, or amend the agenda to add agenda items. So this was a discussion that's why.
So I will say that emails were provided in February, and I am very available. I do not pick up the phone during my workday. I do not pick up my phone if I am spending time with my family. But I always look at emails. I always reply to emails. I've never had a response back saying, that was not what I remember happening. And the understanding at the time that the future topics for discussion was removed or paused with regard to the agenda was reach out. Let's talk. Let's be grown-ups. Let's pick up the phone. So I again, am surprised to hear that for 2 months, some people at the board table have not just addressed a question that they felt that was inconsistent. My responses to the community have gone to all board members. I guess I don't know what else to say for the purpose of tonight's discussion. Director Tate.
So as I stated, I believe the end of the meeting was that Director Dressley could take it back to the policy committee. Today I reached out to Director Malman, or Vice Chair Malman, asked, is this on an agenda anywhere for the policy committee? And her response was basically no. So that's why I'm like, okay, we are not on this 100% not on the same page with this, because I thought at least, you know, that would have been taken up with the policy committee. Regardless, we all had additional information to review after the meeting. I just want to make sure that we're clear on next steps. Are we directing the policy committee to consider the starting points that I had stated or not? Or are we going to have the policy committee to have a discussion around how do we make sure that if parents do not want their students to have access to this material, what needs to happen?
Director Mullin.
All right, so bringing it back, let's focus on what it is that is being asked here. First, after the future topics was taken off for 4 months, it was also clearly stated that if anything, this doesn't prevent us from calling or contacting Chair Hadeen and the superintendent and saying, hey, this is something that, I'm wondering if we can bring this as an agenda item. We don't have to wait for future topics to come back on. I have reached out to Chair Hadeen. I know another board member has too. Those items have, if they haven't been discussed already, are on the agenda for a future meeting. What I'm hearing is 2 things. Is there a way that parents can control how and what their kids have access to? And then I believe there was a discussion about, is there an appeals process? There isn't an appeals process, but those 2 could potentially fall under policy. The discussion about the materials that you brought forward, which you brought forward, I won't get into it. So I understand the concern. I've heard both sides. We've seen the community feedback. We've heard the feedback from, where I stand. I am not about to ban anything. And I understand.
We're not going to have that discussion.
So what I am hearing is that if you want to ask the policy committee, you need to reach out to Chair Hadeen and the superintendent to say specifically what the ask is that needs to go on the agenda. And that has not happened yet. We did have a discussion about it, but that was the ask that got us to the February meeting. If I'm understanding correctly. So those 2 items could potentially go to policy if the board as a whole were to approve it. That's all I have to say.
Does anybody have anything to add to the discussion tonight? With that, we'll move to action items. Our first item at hand is the consent agenda. Could I get a vote? Director Tate?
I'm sorry, we're moving on from that topic again without hearing from each individual board member. So that the entire point was to have clarity.
The table was opened for comment, and there was not an additional comment.
So can we please get clarity from each board member before we move on to the next topic?
Each board member has a choice to weigh in or not to the extent that they would like. They were provided that opportunity. We can provide that opportunity again. Is there anybody who would like to add to the previous topic? Director Zuzek.
My recollection was that there wasn't a consensus. Having said that, I did review all of the materials, and it caused greater concern for me about trying to reduce the number of resources that would be available to students. It heightened that concern instead of decreasing the concern. Because what I thought was a concern over a book or 2 turned out to be a concern over an awful lot of resources. That would be my thought. And it is a deep concern.
Director Beisel.
I'll just say why I voted to have this topic again, because we did have inconsistency, and I think it should be, we talked about it, we've moved on. I know people are not happy with it. We all have differences in opinions on what books we want our children to read, what we want them to, videos, games to play, all that kind of stuff. So if we're not going forward with this, or talk to your children. I mean, I've talked to my children, these movies you're not watching because of this. And it's our responsibility as parents as well. Yes, the school has but we can't, it's such a hot topic, so I don't really want to talk too much about it. But you can't, because I'm not saying a couple people, I'm just making an example, so I don't want this in quotes anywhere, that a couple people are upset about, I don't know, a Star Wars movie, okay? Or a Star Wars book because of something that has happened to them or whatever. How do you take that away from people that really enjoy that? I'm not saying that they are enjoying the book that's been talked about. I'm just, how do you take that away unless you have these conversations with your children? Yes, we all have our morals, we all have our beliefs, but you can't take that away from everybody. So talk to your children. If you have these concerns, call into the schools, call into libraries. I just don't know what more, I don't know what more there is to discuss, but I wanted it to be discussed so that we can drop and move on and talk about what we did for the kids, you know, for what the referendum's gonna be for the kids, or what the high school, middle school brought to the table today. That's why I voted the way I did, and that's all I have to say more.
Thank you, Director Davis.
Yeah, I just want to try to help close the loop. Yes, it was hashed out in February, and to Director Beisel's point, there is certainly no consensus reached. I will, though, verify that Director Tate is correct in that I did suggest the idea of policy taking on the idea of some manner in which a parent could choose that for their specific child. I just want to make sure that it's clear that that's not something that's fabricated. I did mention it back then. That's all I've got.
Director Dressley.
And I'll say the same thing I said then. I don't think that we should take it away from all students, but I think that parents should definitely have a way to opt out if they should choose to opt their child out. That's the way I feel about it.
Dr. Bison.
I'm completely okay with that. I just don't think there has to be, I'm not going to say the word, but there's a huge thing about it. But if there's a way of a procedural, not a policy, a procedural method, we can discuss that in a different time.
Is there any further input to the discussion tonight? Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll try once again to move on to action items. The first action item of the night is the consent agenda. I would entertain a motion in a second to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second, Davis.
Thank you. Motion Beisel, second Davis. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Move on to items for individual action. I'm sorry, I'm having I just got to get it in my screen reset, sorry. Our first item for individual action tonight is a personnel report. I would entertain a motion in a second to approve the personnel report.
So move.
Second, Davis.
Motion Mullen, second Davis. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the Director Tate?
Yes, I need to speak up about this. I have a severe concern after the food service strike and the situation with a board member working within a group that is unionized within the district. I understand that it is perfectly legal. However, just the conflict of interest and the potential issues that can cause concerns me greatly.
Superintendent McDowell.
We need to be clear on our verbiage that we're using, that if it is in law that it's legal, then there is not a conflict of interest, and it's laid out in law and policy that it is. And in fact, the legislature not only said that it is okay for it to happen, but increased the amount of money that a school board member can earn in a given year in order to be an employee of a district. So whether we personally believe it is conflict of interest or not, we cannot use this as a platform while we're being recorded to suggest that it is when it's legally not.
Director Mom.
I also want to point out too that there has been an update to the personnel report. I don't know if anybody has seen that, but essentially that employee is on the books for 4 weeks.
Is there any further discussion? Thank you. With no discussion, we'll hear a vote. All those in favor of the personnel report signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. And I'm going to choose to abstain. We have 6 in favor, 1 abstain, no oppositions, no nay votes. Our next item for individual action is the donations. And I would ask Clerk Beisel to read the donation acceptance resolution.
I, Becky Beisel, introduce the following resolution and move for its adoption. Whereas School Board Policy 706 establishes guidelines for the acceptance of gifts and donations to the district, whereas Minnesota Statute Section 465.03 states that the school board may accept a gift, grant, or device of real or personal property in ordinance with the terms prescribed by the donor only by the adoption resolution approved by 2/3 of its members, and whereas the referenced donations in the school district and District 200 donations report from January 2023 to March 2023 have been generously donated. Can I get a second?
Second.
Do you want me to do the roll, or if all those in?
Yes.
All those in favor? Or do I do a roll call?
Let's do a roll call. That's our practice for resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. Director Zuzek.
Yes.
Director Dressley.
Yes.
Chair Hadeen.
Yes.
Vice Chair Malm.
Yes.
Director Beisel, yes. Director Davis.
Yes.
And Director Tate.
Yes.
Therefore be it resolved, and 0 against, therefore be resolved by the Hastings Public School District School Board to gracefully accept these gifts.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the donors. I believe this was, in a 3-month period, it was a donation of over $90,000 in support of the activities of the school district. And that does not go unseen and it does not go unrecognized. I would also like to point out that I have been living in fear for the last 4 months as chair that I'm going to forget somebody's last name, and I have taken very deep, long breaths in the middle of acknowledging people as the name falls right out of my head. So, and I think I've known people on the board longer than anybody else, almost. So. Now I can let go of it because it'll be fine. All right. Thank you. The next item on the next action item for tonight is removal of policy 604, inclusive education program. I would accept a motion and a second at this time.
Motion, Zuzek.
Second, Davis.
We have a motion and a second on the table. Names were acknowledged in the action. Do we have any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Our next action item is, it's a long motion. Is a additional bond projects for approval. If somebody wants to make a motion to approve the bond projects in the recommended motion as written, I would entertain that.
So move.
Second. So we have a motion and a second on the table to approve a slate of bond projects. Is there any discussion? Director Tate.
Yes, regarding, I want to make sure that I remember this. So, what?
No, I'm sorry, I just had to check that my mic was on.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I remember this one correctly. The Tilden preschool classroom, was that adding a wall to create an additional classroom space? Removing a wall? Okay. And then the nature preserve gravel parking lot, we received several emails today. And I definitely want to take into consideration, because it was from neighbors of that area, and I definitely want to take into consideration their concerns. And their concerns basically were, one, this group has spent, years turning this into a completely natural area, and they're concerned about a parking lot being added for that reason. They're also concerned about it being an eyesore for their neighborhood. And then there was one concern where the gravel parking lot would be abutting their property, and they specifically were against that. And then the overall sense that I got from them is that because this is a gravel rural road, they didn't feel that it was a safety concern, which was the reason that this was brought up. So I guess I would prefer either voting against this, or that we remove this from the list right now so that we can do additional investigation or get additional input from those that are directly impacted in that area.
So I'm going to propose a method of action, and then we'll see which one of those we would take. I would suggest first that we hear from Superintendent McDowell to provide us some background information relevant to how that land came in and what the expectations of that land were and what this approval actually means.
Yeah, so this will relate to the naming thing, the naming project as well, because it's a piece of it. The Nature Preserve project is one of those projects, not unlike some of the other complex projects that we work on, that all of a sudden takes a bunch of left turns and you're trying to figure out what happened. A lot of that reasoning is because the majority of the people, if not all of them, that were at the table when this land was donated and the actual documents came to be, are no longer a part of the conversation. So you have a lot of institutional knowledge that gets lost or messed in the way. However, what ends up being work on our part, mostly Jen Subert's part, is what we've discovered is with this land, there are a lot of requirements to include groups like the USDA and some others that caused us to dig as far as we could into the actual documents that were around since the beginning. And what most people, I would say, probably don't know is that the original documentation has clauses in it to have a parking lot established there, as well as signage established there as part of the donation to this land, that there was an allocation for that. And we do have the documents that state as such in them. I think actually Jen can put them up. That said, it's also something that this, I want to make it clear that the work around this donated land and making it into whatever is what's next as a part of these documents is not something that just came to be in the last 12 months. It's something that particularly Joe Beatty, a former teacher at the high school, longtime teacher, worked on tirelessly in order to get this to where it is. And the stuff that we've presented as of recent in the last few months around this are coming to be because we have bond dollars to pay for it. Up until this point in time, there wasn't a means to purchase a sign, to put in a parking lot without taking it from the general fund or other somewhat committed dollars that the district has. So that's why the timing. So if you piece all of that together as we went through this, and it's up there now, it isn't something new. It's something that was a part of this original document to be looked into and to be a part of it. So that's why. In terms of, it's kind of a chicken or egg thing when we start looking at proposals and approvals. But in order for us to get the approvals from the township, in order for us, well, I shouldn't phrase it that way. It's not contingent upon, it's contingent collective. But typically when you have multiple groups that are needing to approve something for the work that we do as a school district in partnership, the school board needs to be the first one out of the gates, because that's what shows people that you're actually gonna do, you're interested in doing the work, which is why we have you now approving this and approving the next, working to have a discussion of how you want the next item approved as well. I don't know if that information is helpful, but this is what we're uncovering as we move through this. Like I said, this was going to be how I led into the actual next item so that we had some clarity around what that discussion needs to be tonight, but this serves the same purpose.
So I'll share a little bit of my personal experience as a person that used to work for a regulatory agency, or at least partially regulatory agency, and to support this statement from Dr. McDowell. In the event, so the action that we would need to take is to get in alignment with this practice, and I do believe the recommendation from our administration that it is a safety. I can see that there would be people with different interests saying maybe it's not a safety concern, but I could see it being a safety concern to have high school students parking on gravel road, especially as other high school students are pulling in and walking to the space, which is our primary intent for use of that land. In the event that we wanted the other organizations that have regulatory oversight on this property, and some of them are township, probably county, potentially state and federal, we need to demonstrate an interest in doing the project. Then we engage with them, we, the district, engage with them in the regulatory process and the oversight. And that's going to involve input from neighbors. It could involve design modifications in terms of size and exact location. And is it necessary to do some plantings to interrupt the views or to have some of those resolved pieces? This is a time when, given that we have unallocated bond dollars, where we can initiate this conversation. It may be that this project fails to pass the regulatory guidelines. I can't begin to speculate. I have no speculation on that, but it is possible that putting a small parking lot out there could fail the regulatory guidelines, at which point the dollars would roll back into unallocated contingency dollars. We cannot have a serious conversation with a regulatory agency without making a demonstrated interest in doing this project. So I would stand in support of it staying within this piece, because this is a time when we have those unallocated fund dollars and we can get that question answered. And I do believe that there is a safety component associated with high school students parking on a gravel driveway and walking, gravel roadway and walking onto the property. Director Moen.
This is incredibly helpful. So when we received those emails, by the way, thank you so much to everybody that had reached out, because that is invaluable. And looking through them, what really stuck out to me as somebody who is an avid bird watcher. So we were talking about being old lately. And that's one of those that my kids say, well, all the birds, so that makes you an old person. I'll wear it proudly. The preservation of the land. I know Tekla had a very concerted effort to make sure that this was a habitat that was natural and Minnesota. She worked very hard to preserve that land and make it a great space for people. And then she, with the donation and making it an educational space too. So, making sure that we're honoring the intent of the donation and seeing that document really kind of, okay, that helps, knowing that when it was donated, that was a part of the agreement there. So I appreciate that. That was really helpful.
Director Tate.
So again, I appreciate the additional information, but I guess I'm not ready to vote on this tonight. I would love to read that document, to review that. And then the other thing, and I had expressed this before, I'm not in favor at this time for the middle school media center updates. So I move to remove that from this list so that it can be voted on separately. Those two, I should say.
Okay, a couple of things. I need you to clarify your motion. So you're making, let me restate what I believe your motion is. The motion on the table is to approve the comprehensive list as attached of 8 projects. You are making a motion to amend that motion, striking the media center update, middle school media center updates, and the nature preserve gravel parking lot.
Not necessarily striking, but separating the vote out so that it's not all 8 at once, but rather 6 projects and 2 projects.
Okay, but we're going to deal with, so you're asking that the current motion on the table is the approval of all projects. You're asking that the current motion on the table be amended to remove those 2 items and that a new action item be added to address those 2 items separately.
Correct.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Is there any further discussion on that motion? So we'll unpack this from the top down or bottom up or whichever direction that we consider to be the bottom. At this time, I would take a vote on removing the High School Media Center updates and the Nature Preserve gravel parking lot from and moving them into a separate action item. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries. So the current motion on the table is approval of the 6 remaining items: safety and security improvements, middle school door replacement, technology, gymnastics, Tilden preschool classroom, and Hastings High School student bollards. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the action of the motion on the table signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. I don't know where that motion's going to get added in the agenda, but I'm going to take it next. Okay, we're going to take it next, and it will get added next as it gets typed in. So the next, I would consider a motion and a second to approve the Hastings Media Center updates and the Nature Preserve gravel parking lot.
I would make the motion to approve those 2 projects.
Is there a second?
Second, Director Dressley.
Second, Director Dressley. I measured your intent. I understood your intent, and I was going to give it to you even if you never got to the button. All right, is there any further discussion on that, on this? All right, so the motion on the table is approval of the Hastings Media Center updates and the Nature Preserve gravel parking lot. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 6-1. All members with the exception of Director Tate are in favor. Our next action item is change order number 1. I will point out that this change order was moved down from the very first draft this meeting set out, and it incorporates an addition of the bond project for Hastings Middle School door rekeying. I was looking to Mr. Peterson for appropriate words. That was just approved 2 action items ago. I would entertain a motion and a second to approve this change order. It was a bid, I don't say amendment, but it was a potential add. It was an alternate on a previously held contract, so that's why we have that bid already. Entertain a motion and a second.
So moved, Davis.
Second, Beisel.
I have a motion and a second on the table. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Pose same sign. Motion carries unanimously. The next item that we have is, action item that we have is a motion to recommend a name for the donated land. Prior to asking for a motion in a second, we'll get some additional information from Superintendent McDowell.
All right, so just to lead up to this one, as related to the last thing that I just explained, the complexity around this, I mentioned Joe Beatty was a big part of the donated land and was also a big part of, wanting to have Tekla Karpin be a part of the acknowledgement of the land being donated. So fast forward then the discussions that the board has been having about naming and people and all that. The reason we have presented this as the recommendation today is simply because that's been the process of thought coming into tonight. It is not necessarily we think you should name this or not name this after Tekla. That's for the board to decide based on where you're at. The recommendation is really more just pragmatic in nature and honoring the fact that this is something that Joe had worked on and was part of his vision in doing this. Now, again, bring in all the other stuff that you're navigating as a board right now. That may or may not be the way you would want to go in terms of naming this. I can tell you administratively, we are ready with that monument sign to put together something that is ISD 200, and that's the naming of the sign. And then, because Joe and the folks from the county and the DNR have been working on an informational sign, much like you would see at a park, that's where something that has a placard on it that's related to Tekla and kind of the thing you see here, that's where that could still be acknowledged, and not as a board put you in the spot where you've named something on a district placard that you are trying to potentially avoid before you have some type of a policy or not policy. I don't really have a better way to explain it, but that's why this is being presented this way and recommended this way. It isn't to suggest that we think you should or shouldn't do it, but we didn't have a better way to still honor Joe's work and let you as a board decide based on where you are at with the naming discussion.
So I just left a little silence there for everybody to reflect upon what we just heard from the superintendent. Director Davis.
Okay, so I need a little clarification. Is the name going on this sign that's going to be in granite or not? What are we voting on?
That's what you're voting on.
We are the action on at the table, and this is to align with the current monument sign contract. So this is a decision that cannot be, that is time dependent. Okay, and the name that we are voting on will be the name on the monument,
Which is bolded right there.
which is. And the recommendation that's in the motion that's attached to our agenda is Hastings ISD 200, Tekla R. Carpin,
Scroll back up.
Nature Preserve. At this time, I would entertain a motion around naming that property that could lead us to a discussion. I leave the formatting of that motion up to the first person that makes it, I guess.
I make the motion that we agree to the sign language as described herein out of respect for the work that's already gone into this whole process.
Director Dressley seconds that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the table to accept the recommended name of Hastings ISD 200 Tekla R. Carpin Nature Preserve. Is there any discussion? Director Malm.
Knowing the direction that policy or maybe future policy 908 for the naming, without that policy, it's really hard to know. But I'm just wondering, okay, so what I'm hearing is that there will be additional signage there that is not from not purchased by us, that will have Tekla R. Carpin memorialized there. Is that a correct statement?
I would say that would be the intent if, as a school board, you decide you want to leave the signage, not the district signage, to be district signage without a name on it. That would be what we would propose to Joe and the crew that's working on that next layer of informational pieces.
Okay, so knowing that, fully prepared to be shot down, that's totally cool. I would make a motion to amend the monument sign to reflect Hastings ISD 200 Nature Preserve, striking Tekla R. Carpin.
Do we have a second for the motion on the table?
I will second that. I want to make it clear that it's no disrespect intended to anyone that's been involved with this at all. It's just that I am personally opposed to naming anything with someone's name. it becomes too problematic later, potentially. And so it's not just this, it's any name.
Okay.
I just want to be clear on that, that it has means no disrespect to anyone that donated the sign has worked on it.
Okay. I see two hands up. I think I saw Director Tate's first, and then I'll come back to Director Beisel.
I'm wondering if, rather than naming the property after her, if on the sign instead we could say in memory of Tekla R. Carpin.
So again, just for purposes of clarity around the actions, the motion on the table right now is to amend the motion to make it Hastings ISD 200 Nature Preserve. So we have that. I don't want to get too many motions in hand here. No, I understand what you're saying, but I want to resolve one before we get too deep in the weeds on this. But we'll keep that in mind as we see what the other inputs are and try and figure out how to get out of the current motions on the table. Director Beisel.
I just wanted to comment. I agree with Director Davis and Mom. I have no disrespect, but I don't agree with naming after somebody. I do like that if they're going to put that other plaque with information like they do at other parks, to have her name on that.
Is there any further discussion? I think if we wanted to do an in memorial, that would have to be another amendment underneath there. And I would have concerns. I mean, I very clearly spoke at our last, I forget if it was a work session. I think it was a work session talking about 908, that I am not comfortable naming things after people. So I would stand in alignment with that. And I feel like saying in memorial would be pretty much the same thing. I would have the same reservations, but Director Dressley.
My only thing about it is we don't have a policy about it currently, so we don't have a policy. And so I have a hard time saying that we shouldn't respect the wishes of the person who donated it in the first place, or the intent of the donation in the first place. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, Superintendent McDowell.
Don't disagree with that at all. I mean, we go back and forth. The only thing that I would put out there on the table is this is the time, because you don't have a policy, that you need to be thinking about 5 steps ahead. Yeah. If you do it tonight, because there is no policy, it's fair game for anything else coming down the pike, and what will your response be to that? That's really the thing. That's how we've gotten to where we are with it, is without a policy. This is why you need a policy, because without it, you really got to be careful about any precedent you set.
Director Zuzik, and then back to Director.
I'll take a shot at this and see how it goes, but I would accept that amendment to the original motion, because I think that we need to do that. And I'm happy to hear that there's some other site level acknowledgement that would involve a recognition of Tekla Carpin. And
Director Mo.
I'm curious, procedurally, does that have to be, that motion has to be made, seconded, so that we can go back to the original one yet, or?
Well, I think the amendment has to be voted on yet to modify it. And then once we modify it, we need to vote yet again that we accept the name. That's my understanding. We have two sub motions. We need to take 2 actions to get out. But first I'm going to hear from Director Malm.
It's Inception at the board table, the movie Inception. It is great. No, I really struggled with this one too, because I looked Tekla. I did a bunch of stuff this past week once this came to the board book, and I was like, God, it just sounds like an amazing human, and I would be very surprised if there was anything negative about her. So I even went as far as trying to find nature preserve words that would, her middle name is Rose. So to Rivertown, blah, 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 environmental and educational preserve, something that would memorialize her, because this donated land is so, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing that we came upon it. But I came up short because I'm not that creative. But just letting you know, like this, I think it's, you know, in the best interest, knowing what the third and fourth effects are of naming facilities, that it's Hastings ISD 200. It is our money. To change that monument would cost us a lot of money. And unfortunately, that is a huge factor in my decision.
Is there any other further input on the motion on the table? Hearing none, the motion on the table is to amend the proposed monument signage to Hastings ISD 200 Nature Preserve. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-2 with directors Davis, Beisel, Malm, Hedin, and Zuzik voting in favor. We then have a motion on the table to, I want to say approve, but to approve the name of the property, the nature preserve property, to be Hastings ISD 200 Nature Preserve. Recommend that as the land name. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Directors Zuzik, Hedin, Malm, Beisel, and Davis are in favor. Motion carries 5-2. Our next action item is Policy 601, School District Curriculum and Instructional Goals. I would accept a motion in a second to approve this policy.
So moved. Second.
I was waiting. I was going to give it to you. And then the button never went down. All right. I lost track. I'm sorry. Who made the original motion? Director Beisel. Second, Director Davis. I made that up. Director Malm. Okay. I heard it was on that side. I was waiting for it to come from that side. Thank you. Is there any further discussion on Policy 601? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 6-1. Director Tate is in opposition. Our next item is informational, and it's future meetings. The list is long. I would ask that in addition to the items that are on here that are around our board work and our superintendent search, is that everybody recall that we have a employee recognition event. We've been invited to participate and at least stop by the English language learners picnic that's prior to an earlier meeting. We have the Hastings High School Award Ceremony later in May. There was one other thing.
Tomorrow we have the 50th.
Yeah, tomorrow's the 50th anniversary of community education between 3:30 and 5 o'clock at Tilden. I would certainly encourage all board members to get to as many of these events as possible. I appreciate how overwhelming this time of year can feel. I also appreciate the recognition and acknowledgement and how important it is to the people hosting these events that school board members make an effort to attend and acknowledge the work that they've done. All right. No further work at hand. It would entertain a motion in a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, then the button goes down.
Second, Davis.
Motion, Director Dressley, second, Director Davis. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
Crowd, please.